Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a topic that's been whispered about in hushed tones for millennia. A chilling glimpse into the darker corners of human history. Disturbing rituals of ancient civilizations and more. Forget the polished museum exhibits and the romanticized notions of antiquity. We're stripping away the grandeur to reveal the raw, often terrifying, truth of the beliefs and practices that once shaped societies, from the scorching deserts of Arizona to the humid swamps of Florida. And trust me, after tonight, your quiet, comfortable room will feel like an impenetrable fortress of safety. You probably wouldn't have lasted a week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where are you tuning in from tonight? Drop your city and time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We begin our unsettling exploration not with grand empires, but with the whispers of the ancestors. The earliest glimpses of humanity grappling with the vast, unpredictable forces of nature. Imagine yourself, a nomadic hunter-gatherer, perhaps somewhere in the vast, untamed wilderness that would one day become Yellowstone National Park, or along the rugged coastlines of what is now Oregon, struggling for survival against towering predators and unforgiving weather. The year is, say, 10,000 BCE. Life is brutal, short, and constantly precarious. Every sunrise is a gift, every sunset a potential harbinger of doom. When the hunt fails, when the rains don't come, when sickness sweeps through your small band, you look for answers. You seek to appease the invisible powers that govern your world. And sometimes, in your desperation, you turn to the ultimate offering, human sacrifice. This wasn't about malice or inherent cruelty. It was about desperate hope. Imagine your tribal shaman, perhaps an elder with eyes that seem to hold the wisdom of generations, interpreting omens, communing with spirits. A terrible drought has gripped the land. The deer have vanished, and your people are starving. The shaman, after days of fasting and trance, declares that the sky spirit is angered, demanding a profound sacrifice to bring back the life-giving rains. You see the fear in your community's eyes, the gaunt faces of children. The chosen individual, perhaps a captive from a rival tribe, or even a volunteer from your own, is led to a sacred place. Perhaps a peculiar rock formation overlooking a parched riverbed in what is now Nevada, or a hidden cave deep in the forests of Appalachia. The ritual is stark, devoid of the elaborate pomp of later civilizations. It might involve a swift, brutal blow to the head, or a deep cut to the throat. The blood soaking into the thirsty earth. The silence that follows is heavy, punctuated only by the wind, and then you wait. You desperately hope that this ultimate offering will bring relief, that the sky will weep, that life will return. It truly sucked to be a human sacrifice. A common historical truth is that archaeological evidence from various prehistoric sites across the globe, including findings in North and South America, suggests that ritual human sacrifice was practiced by some early human societies, often in response to severe environmental stress, to ensure fertility, or as a way to appease powerful deities, highlighting its deep roots as a peculiar, desperate attempt to control an unpredictable world. This demonstrates that such practices were not confined to later, more developed civilizations. As millennia passed, human societies grew more complex, evolving from nomadic bands to settled agricultural communities. With stability came hierarchy, and with hierarchy, more elaborate rituals. Think of the early farming settlements along the Ohio River Valley, or the ancient mound builders in what is now Mississippi. Their lives were still bound by the whims of nature, but their dependence shifted from the hunt to the harvest. A failed crop meant starvation. A river that flooded too much, or not enough, meant ruin. And so, the rituals evolved. Offerings became more formalized, and the act of sacrifice, while still desperate, began to take on a more peculiar, almost theatrical quality. Consider the theories surrounding the ancient bog bodies discovered in northern Europe. But let's imagine a similar scenario unfolding in the vast, marshy wetlands of what is now the Everglades in Florida, or the muddy deltas of the Louisiana Bayou. While not directly ancient civilizations in the classical sense, these environments could have harbored early settled communities. A body is found, preserved for centuries in the oxygen-deprived muck. The individual, perhaps a young woman, shows signs of a violent death. A slit throat, a blow to the head, sometimes even evidence of strangulation. Her last meal, preserved in her stomach, might indicate a peculiar feast before her demise. The lack of struggle, the careful placement of the body, suggests not murder, but a deliberate ritualistic act. Perhaps she was an offering to the powerful spirits of the swamp, a plea for fertile land or protection from disease. Her body slowly sinking into the peculiar embrace of the earth. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about early human sacrifices is the occasional evidence of the voluntary nature of the victim, particularly in times of great societal stress or spiritual fervor. While coercion was undoubtedly common, some archaeological findings suggest instances where individuals, perhaps revered figures, war captives seeking honorable deaths, or those believing they were chosen by deities, may have willingly submitted to sacrifice. This peculiar act of self-offering, however rare, adds a complex layer to our understanding of these grim rituals, suggesting a deep-seated spiritual conviction rather than mere brute force. Imagine the quiet conviction in the eyes of someone willingly walking to their fate, believing it secured the future of their people. Historians still widely debate the exact percentage of voluntary versus forced human sacrifices in early societies, and whether the concept of voluntary in such a ritualistic and desperate context can truly be understood through modern lenses. As communities grew, so did their needs for protection and prosperity. The peculiar practice of foundation sacrifice emerged in some ancient cultures. Imagine a fledgling settlement, perhaps in what is now upstate New York, building its first permanent longhouse, or a defensive palisade against rival tribes. The belief was that a structure needed a spirit or a guardian to stand strong and ward off evil. And what better guardian than a human spirit, bound to the very foundations? Archaeological findings in some ancient sites have uncovered human remains deliberately interred beneath gateposts, major support beams, or even within walls. These might be the bodies of captives, slaves, or sometimes of even children. Imagine the chilling thought: a child, perhaps from a defeated enemy, silently placed beneath the cornerstone of a new building, their spirit forever tethered to the structure, their tiny life extinguished to bring strength and stability to the community. The concept is unsettling, a peculiar architectural prayer sealed in blood. The purpose of these early sacrifices wasn't always about appeasement. Sometimes it was about divination. Imagine a tribal elder, perhaps in the ancient pueblos of what is now New Mexico, desperate to know the outcome of a looming conflict with a rival tribe, or the best time to plant a crucial crop. In some cultures, the entrails of a sacrificial victim, human or animal, were examined, their patterns and folds believed to reveal prophecies or divine will. The peculiar ritual involved opening the body, carefully removing the organs, and then interpreting the gruesome tableau. Imagine the weight of such a moment, the desperate hope for a clear sign, amidst the stench of blood and the chilling reality of the sacrifice. It's a stark reminder of humanity's ancient quest to understand, or at least influence, an inscrutable future. The ritualistic context is key to understanding these actions. These weren't random acts of murder. They were deeply embedded in the belief systems of these societies. Every step, from the selection of the victim to the method of death and the subsequent disposal of the body, was imbued with symbolic meaning. Imagine a community in what is now the fertile plains of Iowa, preparing for a harvest ritual. The victim, perhaps chosen for their perceived purity or strength, is adorned with specific regalia, led in a procession, and offered to the earth spirits, their blood fertilizing the very soil they hope will yield abundance. The peculiar solemnity of the occasion, the shared belief, made these acts palatable, even sacred, within their own cultural frameworks. For them, it was a necessary communication with the divine, a peculiar language of life and death. Consider the psychological impact on the participants. For modern sensibilities, the idea of sacrificing a fellow human is abhorrent. But for these ancient peoples, it was a profound act of faith and collective desperation. Imagine being part of such a community, witnessing these rituals. The fear would be palpable, but so too would be the shared conviction that these actions were vital for survival. The peculiar emotional cocktail of terror, piety, and communal responsibility must have been immense. It fostered a deep, often unsettling bond within the group, knowing they had collectively faced the ultimate taboo and survived, their existence validated by the perceived blessings that followed. It made the air crackle with a peculiar, terrifying energy. The selection of victims also reveals fascinating, if disturbing, patterns. While captives and slaves were often preferred, indicating a practical and perhaps less emotionally taxing choice, there are instances where members of the ruling elite, or even direct descendants of revered leaders, were sacrificed. This suggests a belief that the purity or prestige of the offering enhanced its efficacy. Imagine a royal family in an early kingdom, perhaps in what is now the Fertile Crescent of California, facing a devastating plague. The king might be advised that only the sacrifice of one of his own, a prince or a princess, could appease the angry gods. The peculiar agony of such a decision, the internal conflict between love and duty, speaks volumes about the depth of their spiritual conviction and the terrifying demands of their perceived divine masters. The archaeological remnants of these early sacrifices are often chillingly direct. Beyond bog bodies, think of mass graves with bodies showing signs of ritualistic killing, carefully arranged skeletons, or tools specifically designed for dismemberment found near sacrificial altars. These grim discoveries, scattered across various landscapes that now form parts of our modern states, provide silent, peculiar testaments to the practices of long-vanished peoples. Each bone, each artifact, whispers a story of desperate pleas and ultimate offerings, forcing us to confront the darker side of our shared human past. They remind us that, even in the dawn of civilization, the line between life and death was often drawn by the peculiar demands of the unseen. The motivations behind these practices were complex and multifaceted. They included appeasement calming angry deities, divination seeking knowledge of the future, fertility ensuring successful harvests or healthy progeny, foundation strengthening structures or communities, and social control instilling fear and reinforcing the power of the ruling elite or priesthood. Imagine the layers of belief interwoven into a single, peculiar ritual. A single act meant to simultaneously please the sky god, guarantee a bountiful harvest, protect the new settlement, and remind everyone of the shaman's terrifying power. This peculiar blend of spiritual and pragmatic goals made these rituals incredibly potent. Even the tools used for sacrifice reveal a peculiar sophistication. While crude stone knives were common, some archaeological finds suggest the use of specially crafted obsidian blades, sharpened to a razor's edge, or ceremonial axes adorned with intricate carvings. These weren't just implements of death, they were sacred objects, imbued with spiritual power, their peculiar craftsmanship reflecting the profound significance of the act. Imagine the glint of a newly flaked obsidian blade, catching the sunlight, knowing its purpose, feeling the peculiar weight of its ceremonial intent. It's a chilling reminder that even the most brutal acts were often performed with a peculiar reverence. The transition from purely ad hoc, desperate sacrifices to more formalized, calendrical rituals marked a significant step in the evolution of these practices. As societies developed calendars and a deeper understanding of celestial cycles, sacrifices became tied to specific times of the year: solstices, equinoxes, harvest seasons, or the beginning of a new reign. Imagine an ancient community, perhaps on the plains of Oklahoma, performing an annual blood offering at the summer solstice. A ritual passed down through generations, its exact meaning perhaps even obscured by time, but its peculiar power undiminished. This regularity made the grim practice a peculiar, inevitable part of their cyclical existence. In conclusion, our initial journey into the disturbed world of early human sacrifice reveals a profound truth. These were not the senseless acts of barbarians, but the desperate, peculiar expressions of nascent spirituality, fear, and a burning desire for survival in an unpredictable world. From the primal fear of starvation to the complex need for social cohesion, these practices laid a chilling, peculiar foundation for the even more elaborate and often terrifying rituals of the great ancient civilizations we will explore next. The whispers of the ancestors, in their brutal sincerity, set the stage for a peculiar human history where the ultimate offering was often deemed the ultimate necessity. It truly sucked to be alive when such beliefs were paramount. We've just peered into the stark, desperate origins of human sacrifice, where survival hung precariously on appeasing unseen forces. If Chapter 1 left you feeling a peculiar chill about our distant ancestors, tonight we plunge headfirst into the vibrant, yet undeniably gruesome, heart of the New World blood for the gods' Mesoamerican rituals. You're about to witness how civilizations thriving in the lush jungles and arid highlands, from the Yucatan Peninsula to the towering peaks of what is now central Mexico, constructed entire societies around intricate cosmologies demanding a constant, peculiar flow of lifeblood, making every step a ritualistic dance between devotion and dismemberment. Imagine yourself, now in the bustling marketplace of Tenochtitlan, the magnificent capital of the Aztec Empire, built on an island in the middle of a vast lake, somewhere around the early 16th century. The city gleams under the Mesoamerican sun, its towering temples, like the Templo Mayor, rising majestically into the sky, their peculiar red paint gleaming ominously. You hear the chatter of thousands, the cries of merchants, the rustle of exotic feathers, and the rhythmic beat of distant drums. But underneath this vibrant tapestry of life, there's a pervasive understanding that life itself is a debt, one constantly owed to the gods. The Aztecs, like their predecessors the Maya and the Olmec, believed that the cosmos was a fragile, dynamic system, constantly in need of sustenance to continue its cycles, and that sustenance was blood. The Aztec cosmology was deeply intertwined with the concept of sacred debt. Their most revered deity, Huitzilopochtli, the god of sun and war, was believed to have been born from a brutal, miraculous act of dismemberment. To keep the sun moving across the sky, to ensure the continuation of day and night, Huitzilopochtli demanded sustenance. And that sustenance, they believed, was human hearts and blood. This wasn't merely a symbolic act, it was a cosmic imperative. Imagine waking up every day, knowing that the very sun that warmed your skin, the corn that fed your family, depended on the peculiar flow of human life. It truly sucked to be an Aztec, living under that cosmic burden. A common historical truth is that the Aztecs regularly performed human sacrifices, primarily offering hearts to the sun god, Huitzilopochtli, believing these acts were essential to prevent the end of the world. These rituals were often conducted on top of monumental pyramids in large urban centers, serving both religious and socio-political functions by demonstrating the power of the ruling elite and intimidating rival city-states. This pervasive practice was central to their worldview. The selection of victims for these elaborate rituals was highly ritualized and varied. While war captives were the primary source, particularly those taken from rival city-states, during the ritualized Flowery Wars, peculiar conflicts fought specifically to acquire sacrificial victims. Other individuals could also be chosen. These might include slaves, criminals, or even, in times of extreme crisis, members of the Aztec population, including children. Particularly for rain gods, imagine being a captive warrior, perhaps from a defeated Tlaxcalan army, knowing your purpose wasn't to be enslaved, but to serve as a peculiar living offering to a foreign god. The fear must have been absolute, mingled with a strange sense of honor. As you were led up the steep steps of the temple, the ritual itself was a terrifying spectacle, meticulously orchestrated and performed by priests with obsidian knives. Imagine the scene at the Templo Mayor, a twin pyramid temple dedicated to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc the rain god. Thousands would gather in the plaza below, watching as priests adorned with elaborate regalia and often painted black led the victim up the steep, blood-stained steps. The victim, often adorned with peculiar sacrificial garments, would be stretched over a convex stone altar, their chest arched upwards. 4 priests would hold down their limbs, while a 5th, the executioner, would wield a razor-sharp obsidian knife. With a swift, precise movement, the priest would cut open the chest, tear out the still-beating heart, and hold it aloft towards the sun, the peculiar ritualistic steam rising into the air. The body would then be pushed down the steps, tumbling to the bottom, where it would often be dismembered. The peculiar, almost factory-like efficiency of these rituals, especially during large-scale ceremonies, is chilling. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about Aztec human sacrifice is the practice of ritual cannibalism following certain sacrifices, where parts of the victim's body, particularly muscle tissue, might be consumed by elite warriors or priests. This wasn't about hunger, but a deeply symbolic act believed to allow the consumer to absorb the essence, courage, or spiritual power of the sacrificed individual, integrating the peculiar energy of the offering into their own being. Imagine a warrior, having participated in a brutal battle, then ritually consuming a portion of his defeated foe, believing it would make him stronger for the next encounter. Historians still widely debate the precise extent and motivations of ritual cannibalism in Aztec society, and whether it was a widespread practice or confined to specific elite groups and peculiar ceremonial contexts. The Mayans, flourishing centuries before the Aztecs in what is now modern-day Guatemala and southern Mexico, also engaged in disturbing rituals, though with a different emphasis. Their focus was often on bloodletting, a peculiar form of self-sacrifice performed by kings and queens to communicate with the gods and ancestors, particularly through visions. Imagine a Mayan ruler, perhaps in the ancient city of Tikal, piercing his tongue with a stingray spine or his penis with an obsidian blade, allowing the blood to drip onto paper, which was then burned. The smoke, mingled with their sacred blood, was believed to open a portal to the spirit world, allowing them to receive guidance or witness visions. While not always fatal, these acts were incredibly painful and deeply symbolic, a constant, peculiar reminder that even royalty paid a physical price for their power. The Mayan civilization also practiced human sacrifice, though perhaps less frequently and on a smaller scale than the later Aztecs. Their victims were often associated with specific rituals, such as the dedication of new temples or ball game ceremonies. Imagine a captive ball player, having lost the ritualistic Mesoamerican ball game, a peculiar high-stakes sport, often associated with cosmic battles, being sacrificed on the very court where he played. His death was believed to honor the gods and ensure cosmic balance, his sacrifice providing a peculiar ritualistic completion to the game. The Olmec civilization, the mother culture of Mesoamerica, preceding both the Maya and Aztecs, also shows archaeological evidence of peculiar ritual violence. While details are scarcer, findings like the baby face figurines and isolated skeletal remains suggest the practice of infant sacrifice, perhaps for fertility rites or to appease rain gods. Imagine a grieving mother, or perhaps a fearful community, offering a tiny, innocent life to the earth, desperately hoping to secure the peculiar blessing of abundance for their crops. The silence of these ancient sites, holding such dark secrets, is particularly chilling. The ball game, a ritualistic sport played across Mesoamerica for millennia, was often intrinsically linked to sacrifice. Imagine the grand stone courts, like the great ball court at Chichen Itza, where peculiar games were played with a heavy rubber ball through stone hoops. While the exact rules varied, the stakes were often incredibly high. For some cultures, the losers, or sometimes even the winners of peculiar honor, would be sacrificed to the gods. Their lives offered to mimic the cosmic battles between deities. The peculiar interplay of sport, religion, and death made these games a terrifying form of public theater. It truly sucked to lose the ballgame. Historians still widely debate whether it was always the losing team that was sacrificed in the Mesoamerican ballgame, or if in some contexts, the winning captain or even the entire victorious team were offered as a peculiar, high-honor sacrifice to the gods, making the outcome a complex spiritual decision. The role of idols and effigies in these rituals cannot be understated. Many sacrifices were performed in front of elaborate, fearsome statues of the gods, often adorned with peculiar symbols of death and power. These idols were not merely representations. They were believed to be living embodiments of the divine, capable of receiving the offerings directly. Imagine the peculiar intensity of such a scene, the blood, the incense, the rhythmic chanting, all directed towards a colossal stone effigy, whose eyes seem to pierce your very soul. This deep, animistic belief gave an unsettling immediacy to the acts of sacrifice. The ritualistic tools themselves were objects of peculiar power and dread. Obsidian knives, sharpened to a surgical precision, were the primary instruments for heart extraction. Imagine the peculiar coldness of the stone, the glint of its edge knowing its purpose. Other tools might include peculiar flint blades, ceremonial spears, or elaborate censers for burning incense. These were not mere weapons, they were sacred implements, meticulously crafted and ritually purified, imbued with a peculiar spiritual significance that made their use even more terrifying. The socio-political functions of these rituals were as crucial as their religious ones. By performing elaborate public sacrifices, the ruling elites demonstrated their immense power, their direct connection to the gods, and their ability to ensure cosmic order. It intimidated rival city-states and solidified their control over their own populace. Imagine being a commoner witnessing a mass sacrifice, the sheer scale of death, the unwavering power of the priests and rulers. It would instill a profound sense of awe and fear, ensuring obedience. These were peculiar spectacles of political and religious authority, meant to reinforce the peculiar hierarchy of their world. The aftermath of sacrifice was often as peculiar as the act itself. After the heart was extracted and offered, the body would often be defleshed, and the skulls placed on a tsompantli, a skull rack, a peculiar and gruesome monument of state power. Imagine rows upon rows of human skulls, pierced and threaded onto wooden poles, gleaming in the sun, a chilling testament to the scale of the sacrifices. These peculiar displays served as perpetual warnings, both to enemies and to the empire's own populace. A chilling reminder of the consequences of defiance and the ultimate fate of those who displease the gods. The concept of auto-sacrifice, or self-mutilation, was also prevalent, particularly among the Maya and Aztec elites. This involved drawing one's own blood through piercing various parts of the body tongue, ears, genitals with thorns, obsidian blades, or bone awls. This peculiar act of personal suffering was believed to feed the gods and ensure cosmic vitality. Imagine a king, perhaps in what is now the rainforests of Honduras, performing this painful ritual in private chambers, his personal sacrifice mirroring the larger human offerings, a peculiar, intimate act of devotion. This emphasized that everyone, from the lowliest commoner to the most powerful ruler, played a part in feeding the cosmos. Historians still widely debate the degree to which fear and social control motivated these peculiar Mesoamerican rituals versus genuine religious conviction, and whether the sheer scale of sacrifice was truly driven by a cosmic imperative or by political expediency. The peculiar cyclical nature of time and Mesoamerican belief systems heavily influenced their rituals. They believed time was not linear but cyclical, marked by the creation and destruction of worlds. Each end of a cycle, or a new beginning, often called for massive sacrifices to ensure the continuation of the current age. Imagine the peculiar pressure as a major calendrical cycle drew to a close. The fear that the sun might not rise again, leading to frantic, large-scale rituals of renewal. A desperate attempt to reset the cosmic clock. This peculiar urgency fueled the scale of some of their most infamous ceremonies. In summary, the Mesoamerican civilizations, from the ancient Olmec to the sprawling Aztec and intricate Maya, crafted a peculiar, terrifying tapestry of rituals centered on the offering of lifeblood. Their sophisticated understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and urban planning belied a profound belief system that saw human life as a necessary fuel for the cosmos. Whether it was the raw, beating heart offered to the sun god, the agonizing bloodletting of a king, or the chilling display of skull racks, these disturbing practices reveal a peculiar, desperate dialogue between humanity and its perceived divine masters. A dialogue spoken in the language of sacrifice. It truly sucked to live in such a world, where the very act of survival was inextricably linked to the spilling of blood, and where the gods, though benevolent in granting life, often had a peculiar and insatiable thirst for it. We've just navigated the blood-soaked, awe-inspiring world of Mesoamerican sacrifice, where hearts fueled the sun and rituals shaped entire empires. If Chapter 2 left you pondering the chilling cosmic demands of obsidian knives, tonight we transition to a civilization obsessed with the afterlife, where peculiar preparations for eternity led to truly disturbing practices. The Nile's Dark Secrets Egyptian Afterlife Rites. You're about to discover how a profound belief in eternal life transformed death into an elaborate, often gruesome journey, where even your brain might find a peculiar new home, making the path to paradise a strangely visceral ordeal. Imagine yourself, now in ancient Egypt, perhaps along the fertile banks of the Nile River, somewhere near what would one day become the modern city of Luxor, around 1500 BCE. The scorching sun beats down. The air is thick with the scent of spices and river mud, and colossal temples dedicated to powerful gods like Ra and Osiris dominate the skyline. Unlike the immediate, desperate blood offerings of the Aztecs, Egyptian rituals surrounding death were driven by a different kind of cosmic imperative, the unwavering belief in an afterlife that mirrored, yet perfected, earthly existence. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end, but a transition, a doorway to a perpetual, blissful existence in the field of reeds. But this journey was perilous, fraught with peculiar challenges, and demanded meticulous preparation. And this preparation for the elite began with a disturbing yet incredibly sophisticated ritual mummification. Mummification wasn't just about preserving a body, it was about preserving the Ka life force and the Ba personality Tachas soul, so they could reunite with the body in the afterlife and achieve immortality. Imagine the scene within a specialized workshop, the Wabet, or place of purification, perhaps nestled away from public view near a bustling necropolis like Saqqara, just south of what is now modern Cairo. The deceased is brought in, often a wealthy noble or pharaoh, surrounded by solemn priests, known as embalmers. The air is thick with peculiar spices and resins. The first and arguably most disturbing step of the process involves the removal of the internal organs. The brain, believed to be merely mucus and not vital for the afterlife, was extracted first. Imagine a priest, perhaps with long, delicate tools, inserting a peculiar hooked instrument through the nostril, carefully scrambling the brain tissue and then tilting the head to drain the liquefied contents out. Sometimes, if the nostrils weren't sufficient, the brain might be removed through a peculiar incision at the back of the neck. This was a messy yet meticulous procedure, reflecting a practical approach to an organ deemed unnecessary for eternity. It truly sucked to have your brain removed through your nose. A common historical truth is that ancient Egyptian mummification involved the systematic removal of most internal organs except the heart, which was believed to be the seat of intelligence and emotion and was left in place. the dehydration of the body using natron salt, and then wrapping it in layers of linen bandages, a process that took approximately 70 days and was crucial for the deceased to achieve eternal life. This complex, lengthy procedure highlights their profound belief in preserving the physical form. After the brain, the other major organs, the lungs, liver, intestines, and stomach, were carefully removed through a peculiar incision, usually made on the left side of the abdomen. Imagine the precise, practiced movements of the embalmers, their hands stained with the peculiar fluids of death. As they reached into the cavity, each organ was then meticulously dried and placed into separate canopic jars, often beautifully crafted and stoppered with lids shaped like the heads of the four sons of Horus Duamutef, Kebesenuef, Hapi, and Imseti, who protected the peculiar contents for the afterlife. The peculiar care taken with these organs, despite their removal, underscores their spiritual significance. A fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about Egyptian mummification is the varying quality of the embalming process based on social status and available funds, leading to peculiar and sometimes grotesque results for less affluent individuals. While pharaohs received the most meticulous and expensive treatments, poor Egyptians might only receive basic natron salt treatment, or even just a simple burial in the desert sand, where natural dehydration would occur. Some peculiar, cheaper methods involved injecting cedar oil into the body to dissolve organs, or merely pickling the corpse in a brine solution, leading to vastly different levels of preservation and often a very peculiar appearance in the afterlife. Imagine a peculiar budget mummification, resulting in a less than perfect eternal form. Historians still widely debate the precise efficacy and specific chemical reactions of some of the less common mummification techniques used for lower status individuals, and whether their variations were solely due to cost or also reflected peculiar regional or temporal differences in embalming practices. Once the organs were removed, the body cavity was cleaned, often with palm wine, a peculiar disinfectant, and packed with linen bags filled with fragrant spices like myrrh, frankincense, and cassia. Then came the crucial step, dehydration using natron. The body was completely covered in this natural salt, a peculiar compound found in dry lake beds, and left for around 40 days. This process drew all the moisture out of the tissues, preventing decay. Imagine the peculiar sight of a body slowly shriveling, transforming into a dried husk. The transformation guided by the arid touch of the salt. It was a peculiar, patient process, ensuring the body would endure for millennia. After dehydration, the body was cleaned again, massaged with peculiar oils and resins to restore some suppleness to the skin, and then meticulously wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen bandages. This was a complex, ritualized process, often performed with specific prayers and spells recited during each layer. Imagine the hours, perhaps days, spent by the embalmers, carefully wrapping each limb, each finger and toe, creating a peculiar cocoon-like form. Amulets and protective charms, like scarabs or the Eye of Horus, were often placed between the layers of bandages, believed to offer protection on the perilous journey through the Duat underworld. This peculiar wrapping process was an art form in itself, ensuring the body was perfectly prepared for its rebirth. It truly sucked to be wrapped for 70 days. The mortuary rituals extended far beyond the mummification itself. Once the mummy was complete, it was placed in a series of nested coffins, each more elaborate than the last, culminating in a magnificent sarcophagus, often adorned with peculiar hieroglyphs and divine imagery. Then came the elaborate funeral procession. Imagine a grand procession making its way through the desert. Mourners wailing, priests chanting, the heavy sarcophagus being pulled on a peculiar sled towards the tomb. This public display was a critical part of the process, ensuring the community bore witness to the deceased's passage into the afterlife. One of the most peculiar and important rituals was the opening of the mouth ceremony. This was performed on the completed mummy or its coffin, usually at the entrance of the tomb, by a priest. Imagine the priest touching various ritual tools, peculiar adzes, knives, and incense burners to the mouth, eyes, nose, and ears of the mummy or coffin. This act was believed to symbolically restore the mummy's senses, its ability to breathe, see, hear, and speak, thereby allowing the Ka and Ba to re-enter and for the deceased to partake in offerings in the afterlife. It was a vital, peculiar step, literally bringing the deceased back to life in their new eternal form. The tombs themselves were not just burial places, they were peculiar homes for eternity, designed to sustain the deceased's spirit. For the pharaohs and wealthy, these were elaborate structures like the pyramids or the rock-cut tombs in the Valley of the Kings. They were filled with peculiar grave goods, furniture, jewelry, food, drinks, clothing, and even chariots, all believed to be necessary for a comfortable existence in the afterlife. Imagine the immense wealth and resources poured into these final resting places, all to ensure a peculiar, luxurious eternity. It truly sucked to be a tomb robber, given the curses and booby traps. The peculiar role of tomb construction was also immense. Pharaohs would begin building their tombs almost as soon as they ascended the throne. Imagine thousands of laborers working for decades, cutting massive stones from quarries, transporting them across vast distances, and meticulously constructing these monumental structures under the scorching sun. The peculiar dedication of an entire society to preparing for death, rather than solely focusing on life, is a striking aspect of ancient Egypt. It shows a profound, peculiar commitment to the unseen. Historians still widely debate the exact methods used by the ancient Egyptians to move the colossal stones for pyramid and tomb construction, and whether the peculiar ramp theories fully account for the precision and scale of their monumental achievements, leaving a fascinating engineering mystery. Beyond the wealthy, the common people also believed in the afterlife. Though their preparations were far less elaborate, they might be buried in simple graves in the desert, where the dry sand would naturally mummify their bodies, a peculiar, natural shortcut to eternity. Their grave goods would be humble, a few pots of food, perhaps a simple tool, but their belief was no less fervent. This broad societal peculiar commitment to the afterlife permeated every level of Egyptian society. The peculiar rituals surrounding judgment in the afterlife were also a source of great concern. Egyptians believed that after death, the deceased would undergo a judgment before Osiris, the god of the underworld. Imagine standing before a panel of 42 peculiar divine judges, reciting negative confessions denying having committed certain sins, and then undergoing the weighing of the heart ceremony. Your heart, the seat of your soul and conscience, you would be placed on a scale balanced against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. If your heart was light, free of sin, you would pass into the field of reeds. If it was heavy with misdeeds, it would be devoured by Ammit, the devourer of the dead, a peculiar beast with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. This terrifying prospect fueled a lifetime of peculiar moral conduct and adherence to religious rituals. The Book of the Dead, a collection of peculiar spells, prayers, and instructions, was often placed in tombs to guide the deceased through the underworld. Imagine relying on a peculiar spiritual roadmap, filled with incantations to ward off demons, pass tests, and correctly identify gods, all to navigate the perilous journey to eternal bliss. These texts provided a peculiar comfort and a sense of preparedness for the unknown. The role of priests and scribes in these elaborate rituals was central. They were the keepers of the sacred knowledge, the ones who knew the intricate spells, the precise embalming techniques, and the correct rituals. They performed the peculiar ceremonies, wrote the funerary texts, and guided both the living and the dead through the complex spiritual landscape. Their peculiar power derived from their unique access to the divine and their mastery over the secrets of immortality. Even the pets of the wealthy were sometimes mummified, a peculiar extension of the human desire for companionship in the afterlife. Imagine a beloved cat or dog, carefully wrapped and placed in a miniature coffin, joining its owner on the eternal journey. This practice highlights a peculiar tenderness within a culture otherwise obsessed with the grim realities of death. In conclusion, ancient Egypt's obsession with the afterlife transformed death into a peculiar, elaborate, and often disturbing ritualistic journey. From the meticulous removal of brains through the nose to the careful preservation of organs in canopic jars. The 70-day mummification process was a testament to their unwavering belief in eternity. The grand funeral processions, the opening of the mouth ceremony, the peculiar grave goods, and the terrifying prospect of the weighing of the heart all illustrate a society deeply invested in ensuring a successful passage to the field of reeds. The Nile's dark secrets, when unveiled, reveal not just peculiar practices, but a profound human quest for immortality, where the boundary between life and death was merely a peculiar, temporary veil. It truly sucked to be an ancient Egyptian who couldn't afford a proper burial. We've just delved into the peculiar, death-obsessed rituals of ancient Egypt, where eternity was meticulously prepared through nasal brain extractions and 70-day mummification processes. If Chapter 3 left you pondering the strange lengths humanity goes to for an afterlife, tonight we shift our gaze to the seemingly more rational and philosophical world of the classical West, only to discover that even among the grand thinkers of the time, disturbing and peculiar rituals persisted. Echoes in the Agora Greek and Roman practices. You're about to explore how the pursuit of wisdom and law still intertwined with gruesome sacrifices, peculiar oracles, and the chilling spectacle of gladiatorial combat, making even their sophisticated societies a strange tapestry of enlightenment and brutality. Imagine yourself, now in ancient Athens, Greece, perhaps walking through the bustling agora, the marketplace and public assembly area, around 400 BCE. The air hums with philosophical debate, democratic discourse, and the scent of olives and freshly baked bread. You might see Plato debating with his students, or citizens casting their votes. This is the cradle of Western philosophy, democracy, and classical art. Yet, beneath this veneer of intellectualism and civic duty, the Greeks, like all ancient peoples, were deeply religious. Their lives governed by the whims of a pantheon of powerful, often capricious, gods like Zeus, Hera, and Apollo. And these gods, while sometimes accepting poetic odes or grand temples, also demanded peculiar forms of devotion, sometimes involving blood. Unlike the mass human sacrifices of the Aztecs, large-scale human sacrifice was relatively rare in classical Greece and Rome, especially in their later periods. However, the shadow of it persisted, particularly in their myths and foundational legends. Think of the myth of Iphigenia, sacrificed by her father Agamemnon to appease Artemis and allow the Greek fleet to sail to Troy. While mythical, such stories reflected an ancient memory of ultimate offerings. More disturbingly, there are historical accounts of ritualistic human sacrifice during extreme crises or, as unusual, desperate measures. Imagine a devastating plague sweeping through Athens, perhaps similar to the one that ravaged the city during the Peloponnesian War. In their desperation, faced with unimaginable suffering and death, the peculiar idea of a human offering, however abhorrent normally, might surface as a last resort to appease an angry god. A common historical truth is that while large-scale human sacrifice became rare and generally condemned in classical Greece and Rome, ritualistic killings of animals were central to their religious practices, and historical accounts or archaeological evidence suggest rare instances of human sacrifice, particularly infant sacrifice or the live burial of people, especially during times of extreme crisis, to avert disaster or appease specific deities. This indicates that the taboo was not absolute, and peculiar circumstances could lead to its reemergence. The primary form of sacrifice in both Greek and Roman religions was animal sacrifice. Imagine a peculiar scene at the Temple of Zeus in Olympia, or on the Capitoline Hill in Rome. A perfectly unblemished animal, a bull, a sheep, or a pig, is led to the altar. Priests, dressed in peculiar robes, perform ritualistic purification. Prayers are offered, and then, with a swift, precise movement, the animal's throat is cut. The peculiar gurgling sound, the gush of blood, fills the air. The entrails are then removed and carefully examined by the priest, a practice known as haruspicy in Rome, derived from earlier Etruscan practices, looking for peculiar omens and signs of divine favor or displeasure. The peculiar arrangement of organs, the specific patterns of the intestines, were believed to reveal the will of the gods. The meat, after being offered to the gods, usually a portion of the fat and bones burned on the altar, would then often be consumed by the worshippers in a communal feast, a peculiar form of shared religious experience. It truly sucked to be a sacrificial animal, a fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about Greek and Roman animal sacrifice is the meticulous selection process for the sacrificial animal, where even minor blemishes or reluctance of the animal to approach the altar could render it unsuitable. Priests would examine the animals carefully, and sometimes peculiar rituals were performed to ascertain the animal's willingness, such as pouring water on its head to make it nod, which was interpreted as assent. This peculiar emphasis on perfection and consent, even if symbolic, highlights a nuanced understanding of ritual purity. Imagine rejecting a perfectly good bull because it seemed a bit off to the priests, forcing them to find another. Historians still widely debate the true extent to which the willingness of sacrificial animals was genuinely believed or merely a ritualistic performance to maintain the sanctity and perceived legitimacy of the peculiar practice in the eyes of the populace. The peculiar power of oracles also played a significant role, particularly in Greece. Think of the Oracle of Delphi, nestled in the peculiar mist-shrouded slopes of Mount Parnassus. Pilgrims from across the Greek world, from distant colonies like Syracuse and Sicily to mighty city-states like Sparta, would come seeking divine guidance on matters of war, politics, and personal fate. The Pythia, the priestess of Apollo, would enter a peculiar trance, perhaps induced by vapors rising from a chasm, or by chewing laurel leaves. Her cryptic, often ambiguous pronouncements were believed to be the direct words of Apollo. Imagine the anxiety of waiting for your peculiar question to be answered, the relief, or despair, upon hearing a prophecy that could determine the fate of a city or your own life. It was a peculiar form of psychological manipulation as much as divine revelation. It truly sucked to receive a bad prophecy. In Rome, the practice of augury was central to decision-making. Before any major undertaking, a military campaign, the founding of a new city, or even the passage of a law, peculiar Roman augurs would observe the flight patterns of birds, the behavior of animals, or the peculiar patterns of thunder and lightning, the direction of their flight, the sounds they made. The number of birds, all were meticulously interpreted as signs from the gods. Imagine a general preparing for a crucial battle against Gaulish tribes, delaying his attack because the peculiar flight of ravens suggested ill omens. This peculiar reliance on natural phenomena for divine guidance permeated every aspect of Roman public life. The peculiar rituals of Roman triumphs also contained disturbing undertones. A triumph was the highest honor for a victorious general, a magnificent parade through the streets of Rome, displaying captured loot, exotic animals, and, most chillingly, chained captives from the defeated enemy. While not a sacrifice in the traditional sense, these peculiar displays culminated at the temple of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus. Imagine the general, resplendent in his peculiar triumphal toga, riding in a chariot, followed by his legionaries. At the end of the procession, the most prominent captives, often kings or chieftains, would be led away and ritually executed in the Mamertine prison. Their deaths a final gruesome punctuation mark to the celebration of Roman power and divine favor. Their peculiar public execution served as a brutal reminder of Rome's dominance. The peculiar spectacle of gladiatorial combat in Rome, while often framed as entertainment, also had deep ritualistic roots, evolving from funeral games. Originally, these peculiar contests were performed at the funerals of important individuals, believed to appease the spirits of the dead and honor their passing with a display of valor and peculiar bloodshed. Over time, they morphed into massive public spectacles, often involving slaves, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals, fighting to the death for the amusement of the crowds in colossal arenas like the Colosseum. Imagine the roar of 80,000 spectators, the peculiar stench of blood and sweat, as two men, armed with various peculiar weapons, fought for their lives. The choice of thumbs up or thumbs down from the emperor was a peculiar form of life or death judgment, turning human suffering into peculiar entertainment and reinforcing the brutal power of the state. It truly sucked to be a gladiator. Historians still widely debate the true origins and precise evolution of gladiatorial combat, and whether its transition from a funerary rite to a mass entertainment spectacle diminished or simply transformed its peculiar ritualistic and religious significance in Roman society. The peculiar cult of Mithras in the Roman Empire, a mystery religion popular among soldiers, involved rituals conducted in underground temples called Mithraea. These peculiar dark spaces were often adorned with images of Mithras slaying a bull. While its exact rituals are shrouded in secrecy due to its mystery cult nature, it is believed to have involved peculiar initiation rites and communal meals. The focus on blood and sacrifice, though likely symbolic or animal, not human within its peculiar iconography, suggests a connection to deeper, more primal ritualistic forms. Despite its growth within a civilized empire, even in Greek philosophical circles, there were peculiar, albeit less violent, rituals. The Eleusinian Mysteries, a secret religious cult dedicated to Demeter and Persephone, promised initiates a peculiar understanding of the afterlife and a happier existence in it. While their rituals were kept strictly secret and never explicitly involved sacrifice, they were profoundly spiritual experiences, believed to involve peculiar symbolic enactments of the myth of Persephone's descent and return from the underworld, culminating in a peculiar vision or revelation that brought peace to the initiates. Imagine undergoing a peculiar spiritual journey in the dark, hoping for enlightenment and a better afterlife. The peculiar role of oaths and curses in both Greek and Roman society also deserves mention. Oaths, taken on the gods, were incredibly binding, and breaking one was believed to incur divine wrath. Curses, often inscribed on lead tablets, deficciones, and ritually buried or placed in wells, were peculiar acts of ritual magic, seeking to harm enemies, rivals, or secure love. Imagine scratching a peculiar curse onto a thin sheet of lead, invoking chthonic deities to bind your enemy's tongue or bring them misfortune, then rolling it up and burying it in a grave to activate its peculiar power. These practices reflect a deep belief in the peculiar, tangible power of words and ritual intent to influence the world. The Roman practice of devotio was a peculiar and terrifying form of self-sacrifice. A commander facing utter defeat might ritually dedicate himself and the enemy army to the chthonic gods, then charge alone into the enemy lines, ensuring his own death. This peculiar act was believed to appease the gods and secure victory for Rome, effectively sacrificing himself to turn the tide of battle. Imagine the chilling resolve of a general, accepting his peculiar fate, sacrificing his own life for the abstract entity of Rome and its divine favor. The peculiar use of the Vestal Virgins in Rome, priestesses dedicated to the goddess Vesta, also highlights a disturbing undercurrent. Their purity was paramount as they tended the sacred fire of Rome. If a Vestal Virgin broke her vow of chastity, she was not executed directly, which was forbidden. Instead, she faced a peculiar and horrific punishment live burial. Imagine being led dressed in funeral garb to a peculiar underground chamber, where you would be walled in alive with only a small lamp, some bread and water, left to die a slow, agonizing death from starvation or thirst. This peculiar non-execution was believed to circumvent the taboo of spilling Vestal blood, while still ensuring a terrifying punishment for a sacrilegious act. It truly sucked to be a disgraced Vestal Virgin. In conclusion, despite their towering achievements in philosophy, law, and engineering, the classical Greek and Roman civilizations were deeply steeped in peculiar, sometimes disturbing, rituals. From the careful examination of animal entrails for omens to the chilling spectacle of gladiatorial combat and the hidden horrors of live burial for Vestal virgins, their pursuit of order and wisdom was often underpinned by a profound, peculiar belief in divine intervention and the necessity of ritualistic violence or sacrifice. These societies, so often held up as the pinnacle of ancient enlightenment, reveal a peculiar and fascinating duality, demonstrating that even the most civilized minds grappled with the raw, unsettling demands of their gods and the peculiar spectacle of human suffering. It truly sucked to live in a world where philosophy and public executions coexisted so easily. We've just navigated the surprisingly refined yet undeniably brutal ritual landscape of ancient Greece and Rome, where animal entrails spoke prophecies and gladiator battles served as peculiar funeral games. If Chapter 4 left you pondering the unsettling blend of philosophy and public spectacle, tonight we shift our focus from settled empires to the harsh, unforgiving world of vast grasslands and untamed wilderness. Steppe sacrifices, nomadic and warrior rites. You're about to discover how cultures forged in relentless movement and fierce combat, from the ancient Scythian lands to the Proto-Mongolian steppes, developed peculiar, often incredibly gruesome, rituals centered on honor, conquest, and a chilling reverence for the spirits of the land and their fallen warriors, making every burial a peculiar monument to power. Imagine yourself now riding across the vast, windswept steppes of Central Asia, perhaps somewhere in what is now modern-day Kazakhstan or Ukraine. Around 500 BCE, you are a member of a fierce horse-riding nomadic tribe, perhaps the legendary Scythians, whose reputation for brutal warfare and peculiar gold artistry precedes them. Your life is defined by constant movement, the rhythm of your horse's hooves, and the ever-present threat of rival tribes or the harsh demands of the elements. Unlike agricultural societies tied to the land, your peculiar connection to the divine is often expressed through the hunt, through conquest, and most disturbingly, through the very bodies of your enemies and revered leaders. It truly sucked to be a settled farmer when these guys rolled into town. The Scythians, like many nomadic warrior cultures, had a peculiar and chilling approach to human sacrifice, particularly in the context of royal burials. Imagine a great chieftain, a powerful warrior who has led your tribe to countless victories, finally succumbing to old age or battle wounds. His death is not just a personal loss, it's a cosmic event, demanding an elaborate, peculiar send-off designed to equip him for the afterlife and ensure his continued influence over the living. Archaeological discoveries in vast burial mounds, known as kurgans, reveal the grim details. At the heart of the kurgan lies the burial chamber of the chieftain, often filled with peculiar gold artifacts, weapons, and provisions for the afterlife. But surrounding him, often in concentric circles, are the remains of those sacrificed to accompany him into the next world. These were not just a few individuals. Accounts from ancient Greek historians like Herodotus describe truly disturbing rituals where 50 of the chieftain's finest horses, along with 50 of his attendants, often young men from his retinue, were ritually killed and positioned around his grave. Imagine the scene: the horses, perhaps strangled or bludgeoned, then disemboweled and crudely stuffed with straw to keep their peculiar forms. Their riders, after being ritually killed perhaps by strangulation or having their necks broken, were then impaled on stakes, their bodies positioned astride the stuffed horses, creating a grotesque, peculiar tableau of a perpetual cavalry escort for their deceased leader. The wind whipping across the steppe would carry a peculiar, mournful whistle through the hanging bodies. It truly sucked to be a chieftain's attendant. A common historical truth is that ancient nomadic warrior cultures, particularly the Scythians, practiced elaborate human and animal sacrifices as part of their royal burial rituals, interring large numbers of horses and human attendants, often slaves or retainers, with their deceased leaders. These peculiar practices were believed to ensure the chieftains' continued power and comfort in the afterlife. Reflecting a society deeply intertwined with equestrianism and conquest, this demonstrates a chilling scale of sacrifice for elite burials, a fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about Scythian burial rituals is the ritualistic self-mutilation and peculiar forms of mourning practiced by the surviving tribesmen after the death of a chieftain. Herodotus describes how Scythian warriors would cut off parts of their ears, shave their heads, gash their arms, tear their foreheads and noses, and pierce their left hands with arrows as extreme expressions of grief and devotion. This peculiar, widespread body mutilation highlights a fierce tribal loyalty and a deep emotional connection to their leaders, far beyond mere obligation. Imagine hundreds of grizzled warriors, covered in blood from self-inflicted wounds, riding silently across the steppe, a peculiar living testament to their sorrow. Historians still widely debate the precise symbolic meaning of each specific act of self-mutilation within Scythian mourning rituals, and whether these peculiar practices were purely expressions of grief or also served as tests of endurance and loyalty among the surviving warriors. Beyond grand burials, the peculiar Scythian reverence for warfare and the supernatural also led to other disturbing practices. They were known for drinking the blood of their first slain enemy in battle, a peculiar ritual believed to absorb the strength and courage of the defeated foe. Imagine the raw, visceral act of scooping up warm blood from a fallen enemy, the metallic taste in your mouth, believing it would transfer their fighting spirit to you. This was a direct, brutal, and peculiar form of spiritual consumption. They also famously made drinking cups from the skulls of their enemies. After a particularly fierce battle, the most valorous warriors would decapitate their prominent foes. The skull would be cleaned, perhaps lined with leather or covered with gold, and then used as a peculiar grim goblet from which to drink wine or blood, often during peculiar celebratory feasts. Imagine raising a peculiar human skull, once the vessel of an enemy's thoughts and plans. To your lips, its empty eye sockets staring back at you. This wasn't just about trophies, it was a profound act of peculiar dehumanization and a terrifying display of dominance. It truly sucked to have your skull turned into a drinking cup. The Sarmatians, another powerful nomadic group that followed the Scythians in the Eurasian steppes, shared many similar peculiar warrior rituals. They too were exceptional horsemen and fierce fighters. Their archaeological sites, particularly their rich female warrior burials, suggest a society where women also held significant power and participated in combat, leading to peculiar burial rites that often included weapons alongside female remains. This challenges the common assumption of male-dominated ancient warfare and offers a peculiar glimpse into their unique social structures. Consider the peculiar spiritual connection to horses in these cultures. Horses were not just animals. They were peculiar extensions of the warrior, companions in life and in death. The extensive horse sacrifices in kurgans show a peculiar reverence, almost a spiritual partnership. Imagine the peculiar bond between a nomad and his steed, a bond so strong that it extended beyond the grave, demanding the horse's ultimate sacrifice to continue serving its master in the spiritual realm. This peculiar equine devotion is a central, disturbing aspect of their funerary practices. The peculiar concept of booty from warfare also had ritualistic significance. Beyond the material wealth, certain items taken from enemies, particularly their heads, were seen as carrying power or prestige. The practice of taking scalps or preserving heads was not just about trophies. It was about demonstrating prowess, intimidating rivals, and perhaps even holding spiritual sway over the defeated. Imagine the peculiar sight of severed heads, or dried scalps, hanging from the belts or saddles of victorious warriors, a peculiar, gruesome warning to any who dared challenge them. Historians still widely debate the precise ritualistic significance of head-taking and scalping practices among various nomadic groups, and whether these peculiar acts were primarily about absorbing an enemy's power, demonstrating dominance, or serving as a form of peculiar spiritual appeasement for the fallen. The peculiar rituals of blood brotherhood also existed among some nomadic warrior tribes. To cement alliances between warriors or clans, A peculiar ritual might involve cutting their hands or wrists and mingling their blood, sometimes even drinking a small amount, to symbolize an unbreakable bond. Imagine two fierce warriors, perhaps from rival clans, performing this peculiar, visceral ceremony under the vast steppe sky, their shared blood forging a new, terrifying allegiance. This peculiar literal blood bond was seen as sacred and irreversible. The peculiar use of shamanism was central to many of these nomadic cultures. Shamans, often figures of immense power and peculiar spiritual connection, would interpret omens, guide rituals, and perhaps even conduct the peculiar sacrifices. They were the intermediaries between the human world and the spirit world, guiding the peculiar customs that ensured prosperity and victory. Imagine a shaman, adorned with peculiar animal furs and feathers, entering a trance before a battle, seeking divine guidance through peculiar rituals, perhaps involving hallucinogenic plants. Their peculiar authority reinforced the necessity of these chilling rites. The peculiar punishment for oath-breaking in these warrior societies was often swift and brutal, sometimes even involving peculiar ritualistic elements. Loyalty and honor were paramount. A warrior who broke his oath might face peculiar forms of public humiliation, torture, or execution, sometimes mirroring the peculiar methods of sacrifice. Imagine a peculiar form of death designed not just to punish, but to cleanse the tribe of perceived treachery. A grim, ritualistic purging that reinforced the peculiar code of honor. The peculiar concept of ancestral veneration was deeply ingrained. The spirits of powerful chieftains and warriors were believed to continue influencing the living, offering guidance or protection if properly honored. This belief underpinned the elaborate burial rituals, ensuring that the peculiar power of the deceased was not lost, but channeled for the benefit of the tribe. Imagine a peculiar reverence for burial mounds, seen not just as graves, but as sacred sites where the spirits of powerful ancestors lingered, ready to be invoked through peculiar offerings. The peculiar use of body modification and tattooing among some of these nomadic groups also had ritualistic significance. Preserved bodies from kurgans have revealed intricate tattoos, often depicting animals or mythological scenes. These peculiar markings were not just decorative. They were believed to convey spiritual protection, signify tribal affiliation, or serve as peculiar records of bravery and achievements. Imagine a warrior proudly displaying the peculiar, intricate patterns on his skin, each line and symbol a testament to his peculiar identity and his connection to the spiritual world. Historians still widely debate the precise symbolic meanings of many of the intricate tattoos found on ancient nomadic bodies, and whether these peculiar markings also served as a form of peculiar passport or tribal identification in a vast, transient world. In conclusion, the nomadic warrior cultures of the steppes, from the formidable Scythians to their successors, developed a peculiar, often incredibly disturbing, array of rituals intimately tied to their mobile, conquest-driven way of life. From the chilling practice of burying chieftains with their mounted, impaled attendants, to the peculiar use of enemy skulls as drinking cups, and the gruesome ritual of blood drinking, their customs reveal a profound, if unsettling, reverence for honor, strength, and the spiritual power believed to reside in their fallen enemies and beloved horses. These were not the rituals of settled empires, but the peculiar, brutal necessities of cultures perpetually on the move, whose very existence depended on fierce loyalty, relentless combat, and a peculiar visceral connection to life and death on the open plains. It truly sucked to be on the wrong side of a peculiar Scythian war party. We've just galloped through the harsh, peculiar world of nomadic warrior rituals, where chieftains received grim cavalry escorts and enemies' skulls became peculiar drinking vessels. If Chapter 5 left you appreciating the relative quiet of a sedentary life, tonight we turn our attention to the ancient, sprawling, and deeply spiritual civilizations of the East, where the pursuit of cosmic harmony often demanded unsettling, peculiar forms of devotion and power, binding the cosmos' Eastern rituals of power. You're about to discover how empires from ancient China to the mysterious Indus Valley sought to align human actions with divine will through intricate, often disturbing, rituals that sometimes required ultimate sacrifice, making the very act of building a city a peculiar cosmic bargain. Imagine yourself now in ancient China, perhaps during the Shang dynasty, around 1200 BCE, in a burgeoning city near what is now the Yellow River. The air is humid, filled with the peculiar scent of burning incense and damp earth. You see elaborate bronze vessels, masterfully crafted, and the distinctive script of oracle bones being carved. This is a society deeply concerned with its ancestors, with the cosmic order, and with the peculiar mandate of heaven that granted kings their power. Unlike the direct, desperate pleas of earlier tribes, Chinese rituals, particularly during the Shang and later Zhou dynasties, were about maintaining a delicate balance between the human realm and the divine, a balance that sometimes required unsettling acts. One of the most disturbing, yet historically confirmed, practices of the Shang dynasty was human sacrifice, particularly for foundational rituals and royal burials. Imagine the construction of a grand new palace, or a temple dedicated to a powerful ancestor spirit. The belief was that these structures needed to be consecrated, to be imbued with spiritual power, and to be protected from malevolent forces. And often, the peculiar offering chosen for this purpose was a human life. Archaeological excavations at sites like Anyang have unearthed mass graves associated with major building projects, where numerous human skeletons, often decapitated or dismembered, are found interred beneath foundations, gates, or large pillars. These were likely war captives, slaves, or even criminals, whose lives were ritually extinguished to bind the cosmos and strengthen the earthly realm. It truly sucked to be a Shang dynasty captive. A common historical truth is that archaeological evidence from the Shang dynasty in ancient China strongly indicates the practice of large-scale human sacrifice, primarily involving war captives and slaves, for various purposes including foundational rituals for buildings, offerings to ancestors, and accompanying the deceased in royal burials. These practices diminished significantly in later dynasties like the Zhou, but remained a peculiar part of early Chinese religious and political life. This highlights a particularly dark aspect of their early imperial power. Beyond foundational rituals, human sacrifices also accompanied royal burials. Imagine the death of a powerful Shang king, a son of heaven. His journey to the afterlife was believed to be as grand and complex as his earthly reign. Just like the Scythians we discussed, his retainers, servants, and even warriors were sometimes sacrificed to accompany him. However, the scale and peculiar methods could vary. Sometimes entire entourages, along with their animals, were interred. Imagine the peculiar sight of dozens, sometimes hundreds, of bodies, carefully arranged around the king's tomb. Their peculiar poses suggesting ritualized death rather than natural demise. Their spirits were meant to continue serving the king in the afterlife, ensuring his comfort and power in the spiritual realm. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about Shang dynasty human sacrifice is the use of varying methods of killing depending on the ritual's purpose or the victim's status, indicating a peculiar, systematic approach to ritual death. Some victims were beheaded, others dismembered, some buried alive, and still others ritually burned or drowned. This peculiar diversity in execution methods suggests a complex symbolic meaning behind each act, tailored to specific deities or desired outcomes, rather than just a crude form of killing. Imagine the peculiar ritual planner deciding exactly how each life would be extinguished to appease a particular spirit. Historians still widely debate the precise symbolic meaning behind the different methods of human sacrifice employed by the Shang dynasty, and whether these peculiar variations reflected distinct regional practices or a highly centralized, ritually codified system of death. The Zhou dynasty, which followed the Shang, largely curtailed human sacrifice, especially on a mass scale, though the practice never entirely vanished. Instead, they emphasized animal sacrifice and more symbolic offerings. However, the concept of immolation by fire for specific peculiar purposes continued. Imagine a ritual performed by a Zhou king, perhaps in a consecrated field, where valuable goods and sometimes animals were burned as offerings to heaven. The peculiar smoke carrying the essence to the celestial deities. This transition from human to animal and symbolic offerings marked a peculiar evolution in Chinese ritualistic thought, moving towards a more abstract form of reverence. In ancient India, particularly during the Vedic period, roughly 1500 to 500 BCE, elaborate yajnas, or fire sacrifices, were central to religious life. While largely involving animals, the texts sometimes hint at, or controversially interpret, earlier peculiar forms of human sacrifice. These were incredibly complex rituals, requiring meticulous adherence to specific chants, offerings, and procedures performed by Brahmin priests. Imagine a peculiar scene: a grand fire altar constructed under the open sky, priests chanting ancient hymns in Sanskrit, purified butter ghee poured into the flames, alongside grains and eventually animals, their peculiar smoke rising towards the heavens. The correct performance of these rituals was believed to maintain cosmic order, secure prosperity, and grant divine favor to the patrons. One of the more unsettling philosophical concepts in ancient Indian thought, though not a ritualistic practice in the same vein as those of Mesoamerica or the Shang, is the idea of sati, or widow immolation, which became more prevalent in later periods, though its origins are complex and debated. This was a peculiar and horrifying practice where a widow would voluntarily or sometimes forcibly immolate herself on her deceased husband's funeral pyre. While often presented as an act of ultimate devotion and purity, ensuring her husband's passage to heaven and elevating her own status, it was a deeply disturbing custom that reflected a peculiar societal pressure and patriarchal control over women's lives. Imagine the peculiar, tragic scene: a woman, adorned in her bridal finery, walking purposefully towards the burning pyre, amidst chanting and peculiar ceremonies. It truly sucked to be a widow in some parts of ancient India. Historians still widely debate the true origins and precise historical prevalence of sati, and whether it was genuinely a widespread Vedic practice or a peculiar localized custom that gained prominence in later centuries, particularly during medieval and early modern periods. In ancient Japan, early forms of peculiar spiritual practice, preceding the widespread adoption of Buddhism and Shinto as we know it today, sometimes involved human offerings, particularly for the foundation of significant structures or to appease angry deities. While not as extensively documented as in China, legends and some archaeological findings suggest instances of Yi Tobashira Renju, or human pillars. This peculiar practice involved burying people alive, or sacrificing them and then interring them, beneath or within large-scale construction projects like bridges, dams, or castles. The victims were believed to become spiritual guardians, lending strength and protection to the structure. Imagine the chilling belief that a sturdy bridge, crucial for trade and defense, owed its peculiar resilience to the buried spirit of a human sacrifice. The peculiar rituals of shamanism and ancestor worship were prevalent across many East Asian cultures, particularly in Korea and parts of Siberia. Shamans acted as peculiar intermediaries between the human and spirit worlds, conducting rituals to heal the sick, guide spirits, and offer peculiar sacrifices, often animals, to appease malevolent entities or honor benevolent ancestors. These peculiar rites, often involving drumming, chanting, and trance states, sought to maintain harmony and protect the community from unseen threats. Imagine a peculiar ceremony in a small village, a shaman entering a trance, her voice changing, her body shaking, as she peculiar communes with spirits to ward off a terrible plague. The peculiar importance of divination across East Asian cultures also led to specific ritualistic practices. In China, oracle bones were used for pyromancy divination by fire. Imagine a peculiar tortoise plastron or ox scapula, carefully cleaned and prepared. A heated bronze rod would be applied to specific points on the bone, causing peculiar cracks to form. The patterns of these cracks were then interpreted by diviners to answer questions about harvests, warfare, or royal fortunes, and the questions and answers were often carved onto the bone itself, forming the earliest known Chinese writing. This peculiar, fiery dialogue with the ancestors shaped dynastic decisions for centuries. The peculiar Chinese concept of the mandate of heaven also had profound ritualistic implications. Kings and emperors were believed to rule only with the approval of heaven, and this mandate could be withdrawn if they ruled unjustly or if natural disasters occurred. This peculiar belief instilled a constant pressure on rulers to perform rituals correctly, to live virtuously, and to ensure the prosperity of their people, lest peculiar heavenly signs appear, signaling their impending downfall. A peculiar drought or a series of peculiar earthquakes could be interpreted as heaven's disapproval, sometimes leading to frantic, elaborate rituals of apology and appeasement. Historians still widely debate the precise mechanisms by which the concept of the mandate of heaven influenced political change in ancient China, and whether the peculiar signs of heavenly displeasure were genuinely believed, or sometimes strategically manipulated by ambitious factions. In ancient Japan, the emperor was and is considered a peculiar divine figure, a direct descendant of the sun goddess Amaterasu. This peculiar divine lineage underpinned numerous rituals aimed at ensuring the prosperity of the nation and the continuation of the imperial line. While human sacrifice faded early, elaborate and peculiar ceremonies involving purification, offerings, and petitions to the kami spirits were conducted regularly. Imagine the precise centuries-old rituals performed by the emperor in the inner sanctums of the imperial palace, designed to maintain the peculiar cosmic balance of the nation and ensure divine favor for his people. The peculiar role of ritual purity was central to many Eastern traditions, particularly in Japan. Before approaching sacred spaces or performing important rites, individuals, especially priests and imperial figures, would undergo elaborate purification rituals, often involving peculiar symbolic washing with water or salt. This emphasized the peculiar need to cleanse oneself of defilement before communing with the divine, ensuring that peculiar negative energies did not disrupt the delicate balance between the human and spiritual realms. The peculiar practice of ancestral veneration was a cornerstone of many Eastern societies, particularly in China and Japan. Ancestors were believed to continue influencing the lives of their descendants, offering guidance, protection, or even causing misfortune if displeased. This led to elaborate rituals of peculiar offerings, food, incense, symbolic paper money, prayers, and ceremonies performed at family altars or ancestral temples. Imagine a peculiar family gathering, offering meticulously prepared food to their deceased grandparents, bowing deeply, seeking their peculiar blessings for a prosperous future. This peculiar, ongoing relationship with the dead profoundly shaped daily life and peculiar ritual practices. Even the peculiar art of calligraphy in some Eastern cultures could be considered a ritualistic practice. The meticulous discipline, the focus, the deep connection to philosophical and spiritual concepts inherent in each stroke, transformed writing into a peculiar meditative and spiritual act. Imagine a Zen master carefully preparing his peculiar ink and brush, each stroke a deliberate act of peculiar presence and intention, imbuing the written word with spiritual power. In conclusion, the ancient civilizations of the East, from the Shang dynasty's human foundational sacrifices to the Vedic fire offerings and Japan's human pillars, developed a peculiar and diverse array of disturbing rituals driven by a profound need to bind the cosmos and maintain a delicate balance between the human and divine. Their pursuit of order, prosperity, and imperial power was often underpinned by unsettling acts of devotion, whether through direct human offerings, elaborate animal sacrifices, or peculiar spiritual practices. These rituals reveal a fascinating, if sometimes horrifying, testament to humanity's universal quest to understand and influence the unseen forces that govern their world. often at a peculiar and terrifying cost. It truly sucked to live in a world where the stability of your home might have required a peculiar hidden sacrifice beneath its very foundations. We've just navigated the intricate, often disturbing, ritualistic landscapes of ancient Eastern civilizations, where foundation sacrifices secured grand structures and celestial mandates governed imperial power. If Chapter 6 left you contemplating the peculiar cosmic bargains struck by ancient emperors, tonight we delve into an even more unsettling realm, veiled in mystery cults and secret societies. You're about to peer behind the carefully guarded veils of exclusive groups, from the Roman Empire to peculiar enclaves in ancient Britannia, discovering their chilling initiation rites, their hidden practices, and the profound, often psychological grip they held over their members, making the very act of belonging a peculiar form of ritualistic surrender. Imagine yourself now in ancient Rome, not in the bustling Forum or the Grand Colosseum, but in the dimly lit, whispered corners of the city. Around the 1st century CE, the official state religion, with its public ceremonies and grand temples, dominates public life. Yet beneath this veneer, a peculiar hunger for more intimate, more profound spiritual experiences thrives. People seek personal salvation, mystical insight, or a stronger sense of community than the public cults offer. This desire gives rise to mystery cults and secret societies, groups whose rites were peculiar, exclusive, and often deeply disturbing. One of the most infamous and truly unsettling examples is the cult of Bacchus Dionysus in Greece, particularly as it evolved in Rome. While initially a vibrant, even frenzied celebration of wine, ecstasy, and liberation, by the 2nd century BCE, its peculiar rituals in Rome, known as the Bacchanalia, had become highly secretive and, according to Roman authorities, descended into moral depravity and criminal activity. Imagine, if you will, venturing into a hidden villa on the outskirts of ancient Pompeii, or deep in a secluded forest in the Apennine Mountains. Far from the watchful eyes of Roman law, the initiation rites into these peculiar Bacchanalian cults were said to be deeply disturbing. While historical accounts are colored by Roman suppression and propaganda, they describe rituals involving excessive consumption of wine, ecstatic dancing, frenzied drumming, and often peculiar sexual licentiousness and violence. Imagine initiates, perhaps blindfolded and disoriented, led into a torchlit chamber where the air is thick with the scent of wine and peculiar incense. The sounds are overwhelming frantic music, guttural chants, and the peculiar cries of those already in a trance. The ritual might involve symbolic death and rebirth, or peculiar ordeals designed to break down individual identity and foster absolute loyalty to the peculiar group. Some accounts even hinted at ritual murder of those who revealed secrets, or of individuals used in peculiar sacrificial rites. It truly sucked to be a Roman who got on the wrong side of the Bacchanalia. A common historical truth is that the Roman Senate issued a severe decree, Senatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus, in 186 BCE, outlawing the Bacchanalia due to concerns about their secretive nature, perceived moral corruption, and potential for political conspiracy. This suppression led to widespread arrests, executions, and the dismantling of cultic cells, highlighting the Roman state's peculiar intolerance for unauthorized, secretive religious practices. This suppression provides much of our biased knowledge of their disturbing activities. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about the Bacchanalia is the alleged participation of women as primary leaders and participants, which was particularly alarming to the patriarchal Roman authorities, and a key reason for their severe suppression. The idea of women meeting in secret, unchaperoned, and engaging in ecstatic rituals was seen as a profound threat to Roman social order and male authority. This peculiar perceived subversion of gender roles added another layer of panic and severity to the state's reaction. Imagine the peculiar fear in Roman society when women traditionally confined to the home were reported to be gathering in wild, secretive rituals, Historians still widely debate the true extent of the Bacchanalia's alleged criminal activities versus the Roman Senate's political and moral panic, and whether the peculiar depravity was exaggerated to justify severe state repression against perceived threats to public order, another prominent mystery cult. One we touched upon briefly in Chapter 4 was the cult of Mithras. While its rituals were perhaps less overtly violent than the Bacchanalia, they were no less peculiar and exclusive. Popular among Roman soldiers across the empire, from Hadrian's Wall in northern England to the deserts of Syria, this peculiar cult worshipped the Persian god Mithras, typically in underground temples called Mithria. These spaces were deliberately designed to be cave-like, dark and intimate, creating a peculiar sense of otherworldliness. Initiation into the cult of Mithras involved a series of 7 peculiar grades, each with its own specific rituals and symbolic meanings. While the exact details are secret, they are believed to have involved ordeals of purification, peculiar symbolic tests of courage, and elaborate ceremonial meals. Imagine a Roman soldier, perhaps in a Mithraeum beneath a bustling Roman fort, undergoing an initiation rite. He might be blindfolded, subjected to peculiar sounds or made to lie prostrate, experiencing a symbolic death and rebirth. The peculiar iconography within the Mithraea always features Mithras slaying a bull, often with peculiar astronomical symbols, suggesting complex cosmic beliefs that were revealed gradually to initiates. The peculiar bond forged among male members in these secret, underground spaces was incredibly strong, creating a peculiar brotherhood that transcended rank and origin. The cult of Cybele, the great mother goddess, originating from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, also gained significant peculiar traction in Rome. Her worship involved ecstatic and often peculiar self-mutilation. The most disturbing aspect was the practice of ritual castration by her priests, known as the Galli. Imagine a male devotee, perhaps in a frenzied state during a peculiar festival honoring Cybele, taking a peculiar blade and ritually castrating himself as the ultimate act of devotion, dedicating his life and virility entirely to the goddess. These peculiar, irreversible acts were a public declaration of complete surrender and a peculiar form of spiritual transformation, creating a class of eunuch priests who were seen as peculiar and powerful conduits to the divine. It truly sucked to be a Gallus. Historians still widely debate the degree of coercion involved in the ritual castration of the Galli priests in the cult of Cybele, and whether it was always a purely voluntary act, driven by peculiar religious fervor, or sometimes influenced by societal pressures and the desire for spiritual authority. Moving beyond specific cults, the Roman world also saw peculiar secret societies linked to magic and forbidden practices. Think of small, clandestine groups gathering in darkened rooms, attempting to conjure spirits, cast curses, or predict the future through forbidden means. These were not established religions, but peculiar, underground networks of individuals seeking power or knowledge through illicit rituals. Imagine a group meticulously following instructions from ancient grimoires, perhaps involving peculiar animal sacrifices or the peculiar manipulation of human remains, all under the cloak of night, whispering incantations to summon peculiar demons or bind the will of others. The peculiar allure of forbidden knowledge drove these disturbing practices in the lesser-known corners of the Roman Empire, particularly among indigenous peoples who resisted Romanization. Peculiar and often disturbing secret societies persisted, carrying on ancient pre-Roman rites. Consider the Celtic Druids in ancient Britannia. While much of our knowledge comes from Roman sources which are often biased, the Druids were powerful religious leaders, judges, and educators. Their peculiar rituals were shrouded in mystery, performed in sacred groves, and sometimes involved practices that horrified the Romans. Accounts from Roman writers like Caesar describe the Druids practicing human sacrifice, particularly of war captives or criminals. Imagine a colossal wicker effigy, perhaps built in a sacred grove in what is now Wiltshire, England. Numerous victims, alive and trapped within the peculiar structure, are then set ablaze as an offering to their peculiar gods, the smoke and screams rising into the peculiar forest canopy. This gruesome ritual, designed to appease deities or ensure the fertility of the land, was a particularly disturbing aspect of Celtic religious practice, making their peculiar nature-bound spirituality terrifyingly literal. A common historical truth is that ancient Celtic druids, as described by Roman authors like Julius Caesar, engaged in human sacrifice, often using war captives or criminals, sometimes involving burning them alive in large wicker effigies. While Roman accounts may be exaggerated, archaeological evidence of sacrificial sites in Celtic lands corroborates a practice of ritualistic violence and human offering. This underscores the peculiar brutality behind some ancient European spiritual systems. The peculiar initiation rites into warrior societies among some Germanic or Celtic tribes also held disturbing elements. Young men, often as part of a peculiar coming-of-age ritual, might undergo severe tests of endurance, isolation, or even ritualistic combat, sometimes involving hallucinogenic substances, to prove their bravery and spiritual fortitude. Imagine a peculiar ordeal in a remote forest, where a young warrior faces a terrifying, solitary night, confronting his deepest fears, perhaps even encountering strange visions, all to be deemed worthy of joining the peculiar ranks of his tribe's fighting men. These peculiar rites forged deep bonds and instilled unwavering loyalty through shared trauma. The peculiar concept of communal secrecy was paramount in all these cults and societies. Revealing the rites, the names of members, or the inner workings of the group was often punishable by death, sometimes a peculiar ritualistic execution designed to deter others. This intense secrecy protected the peculiar power of the group and ensured the purity of its beliefs, creating an environment where trust was absolute within the inner circle. But suspicion was rampant towards outsiders. Imagine the constant tension of knowing that a single whispered word could lead to your peculiar demise. The peculiar psychological grip these societies held over their members was immense. They offered a sense of belonging, purpose, and access to esoteric knowledge or divine favor that the mainstream cults did not. For those seeking meaning or for those marginalized by society, these groups offered a peculiar, powerful alternative. The intense, often disturbing rituals served to create a profound emotional and spiritual bond, breaking down pre-existing identities and reshaping individuals into devoted members. This peculiar transformation made escape, or even descent, incredibly difficult. Historians still widely debate the precise psychological mechanisms through which ancient mystery cults and secret societies exerted such powerful control over their members, and whether the peculiar combination of ritual, secrecy, and shared experience truly led to altered states of consciousness or simply reinforced deep-seated beliefs. Even the peculiar symbolism of the underworld played a significant role in many of these cults. Initiations often involved a symbolic journey into the realm of the dead, a peculiar descent into darkness and chaos, followed by a triumphant return to light and rebirth. This peculiar metaphorical death and resurrection was a powerful transformative experience, designed to imbue the initiate with a new understanding of life, death, and eternity. Imagine undergoing a peculiar ritual in a pitch-black chamber, hearing unsettling sounds, feeling peculiar textures, believing you were truly confronting the spirits of the dead. The peculiar use of altered states of consciousness was also common, whether through fasting, sleep deprivation, hallucinogenic plants, or ecstatic dance. Many of these rituals aimed to induce trance states where initiates might experience visions, commune with deities, or feel a profound connection to the divine. These peculiar experiences, often facilitated by charismatic leaders, served to reinforce the cult's teachings and solidify the peculiar spiritual authority of the group. The peculiar allure of esotericism and hidden knowledge was a powerful draw. While public religions were accessible to all, these cults promised exclusive, deeper truths revealed only to the initiated. This sense of being chosen or privy to peculiar Secret wisdom created a powerful sense of superiority and belonging, reinforcing the commitment of members to their peculiar group. Imagine the peculiar pride of knowing sacred rites and hidden truths that the common masses could never comprehend. In conclusion, delving into the shadowy world of ancient cults and secret societies reveals a peculiar and often disturbing underbelly to seemingly civilized ancient societies. From the alleged depravities of the Roman Bacchanalia and the self-mutilation of Cybele's priests, to the human sacrifices of the Celtic Druids and the peculiar initiation rites of warrior fraternities, these groups offered powerful, often transformative experiences. Their peculiar rituals, shrouded in secrecy and often involving physical or psychological ordeals, forged intense loyalties and promised profound spiritual insights or power. These peculiar hidden rituals demonstrate humanity's persistent search for meaning, connection, and control beyond the conventional, often leading to profoundly unsettling practices conducted beneath the veil of mystery. It truly sucked to be on the outside, not knowing the peculiar secrets of those who controlled your world. We've just unveiled the peculiar, often unsettling, world of ancient cults and secret societies, where hidden rituals and psychological bonds held sway over their initiates. If Chapter 7 left you pondering the allure of forbidden knowledge and the power of secrecy, tonight we shift our gaze from the organized spiritual to the intensely personal and terrifying realm of manipulation. The dark arts magic, curses, and forbidden rites. You're about to explore how desperate individuals, from the bustling cities of ancient Babylon to the secluded swamps of Roman Florida, sought to bend the will of gods and mortals, to inflict harm, or to conjure the dead through peculiar, often gruesome practices that whispered of forbidden power and chilling desperation, making the very air crackle with unseen malevolence. Imagine yourself, now in ancient Mesopotamia, perhaps in the sprawling city of Babylon, around 700 BCE. The ziggurats tower over the landscape. Mathematicians plot the stars, and scribes meticulously record laws and legends in cuneiform. This is a highly advanced society, yet it's also one deeply steeped in a belief in unseen forces, benevolent gods, malevolent demons, and spirits that could be appeased, manipulated, or even commanded through peculiar rituals. Beyond the grand temples and official priesthoods, there was a peculiar, darker undercurrent. The realm of magic, curses, and necromancy, unlike public religious ceremonies, which sought to maintain cosmic order and appease the gods. The dark arts were often about personal gain, revenge, or manipulation. Imagine a Babylonian merchant, perhaps cheated in a trade deal, or a rejected lover consumed by jealousy. They wouldn't go to the temple to pray for justice. They might seek out a peculiar practitioner of forbidden rituals, someone known to traffic in curses and enchantments. The goal was direct to inflict illness, financial ruin, or emotional torment on their adversary. The methods were peculiar, often involving effigies, spoken incantations, and disturbing symbolic acts. It truly sucked to be on the receiving end of a Babylonian curse. A common historical truth is that ancient Mesopotamian civilizations, including the Babylonians and Assyrians, possessed a rich and complex magical tradition, with extensive cuneiform texts detailing various types of spells, incantations, and rituals for both benevolent healing, protection, and malevolent curses, binding spells, purposes. These practices highlight a widespread belief in the direct manipulation of supernatural forces for personal ends. This shows that magic was a formalized, peculiar part of their intellectual landscape. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about Mesopotamian magical texts is the peculiar emphasis on identifying and expelling specific demons or evil spirits believed to cause illness or misfortune. Often through elaborate diagnostic rituals and exorcistic incantations, practitioners would meticulously observe symptoms, consult omens, and then recite lengthy, complex spells designed to name and banish the malevolent entity. sometimes using peculiar protective amulets or symbolic effigies of the demon. This peculiar focus on identification showcases a sophisticated, albeit pre-scientific, understanding of disease and misfortune. Imagine a peculiar demon hunting ritual, with a focus on accurate naming to ensure effective expulsion. Historians still widely debate the extent to which Mesopotamian magical practices were genuinely separated from official religious rituals, and whether the peculiar lines between divine intervention, priestly healing, and independent sorcery were fluid or rigidly defined in daily practice. One of the most chilling aspects of ancient magic was necromancy, the peculiar attempt to communicate with the dead, often to gain knowledge of the future or uncover hidden truths. Imagine a shadowy figure, perhaps in a secluded, moonlit burial ground in ancient Egypt, performing a peculiar ritual to summon a departed spirit. This might involve invoking specific deities of the underworld, burning peculiar incense, or even using parts of the deceased's body. The goal was to extract information, to gain a peculiar form of power from beyond the grave. The very act was considered deeply forbidden, a peculiar transgression against the natural order, and was universally associated with dark, malevolent forces. It truly sucked to be a ghost forced to spill secrets. Moving to ancient Greece and Rome, despite their philosophical advances, magic and curses remained prevalent, often intertwining with popular beliefs and peculiar superstitions. The deficciones, or curse tablets, were a peculiar and widespread practice. Imagine a person in ancient Rome, perhaps angered by a rival charioteer or seeking to win a lawsuit. They would write their peculiar curse on a thin lead tablet, invoking underworld deities or specific demons to inflict harm, to bind their opponent's tongue in court, to cause them to stumble in a race, or to bring them peculiar misfortunes. The tablet would then be ritually folded, pierced with a nail, a peculiar act of binding, and buried in a grave, thrown into a well, or placed in a temple of a chthonic deity, believed to activate its peculiar sinister power. The content of these peculiar curses ranged from mild annoyance to truly horrifying malevolence, sometimes wishing death or agonizing disease upon the target. Imagine finding a peculiar lead tablet centuries later, unearthed from a Roman well, and deciphering its chilling inscription, "May name of person be bound," his words tangled, his eyes blinded, his limbs useless, his life a misery. The sheer volume of these peculiar tablets discovered across the Roman Empire suggests a society where personal grievances were often resolved not through law, but through the peculiar and terrifying power of hidden rituals. Another disturbing practice was erotic magic, the peculiar attempt to compel someone's love or sexual desire through supernatural means. Imagine a lovelorn Roman, desperate for affection, seeking out a peculiar sorceress. The ritual might involve crafting peculiar effigies, burning specific herbs, or performing peculiar incantations, often with a focus on binding the target's will or driving them to madness until they succumbed to desire. These were not romantic gestures, they were peculiar, coercive acts designed to strip away free will, turning affection into a peculiar form of supernatural enslavement. It truly sucked to be magically compelled. Historians still widely debate the psychological effects of being the target of a curse tablet in ancient societies, and whether the peculiar belief in their power could genuinely induce psychosomatic illnesses or even death through fear and anxiety. The peculiar use of human body parts or grave dirt in ancient magical rituals was also common. In ancient Egyptian magic, for instance, peculiar amulets might incorporate fragments of mummified bodies, or peculiar powders made from ground bones. In other cultures, grave dirt was believed to carry the peculiar energy of the deceased, making it a potent ingredient for curses or necromantic rituals. Imagine a practitioner carefully collecting peculiar samples from a fresh grave, believing they held the peculiar power to summon or bind spirits for their malevolent ends. These were not just symbolic acts, they were believed to be literal conduits of peculiar power. The peculiar concept of sympathetic magic underpinned many of these rituals. The belief was that by manipulating an image or a representation of a person, you could affect the person themselves. This often involved voodoo doll-like effigies. Imagine a small wax or clay figure, perhaps crudely shaped like your enemy, pierced with peculiar pins or needles, or subjected to ritualistic burning. Every injury inflicted upon the effigy was believed to manifest as real pain or illness in the target, a peculiar and terrifying form of remote control. The peculiar fear of the evil eye was pervasive across many ancient cultures, from the Mediterranean to the Near East. This was the belief that a malevolent gaze, often unintentional, could inflict misfortune, illness, or even death. While not a ritual in itself, it led to numerous peculiar counter-rituals and protective charms. Amulets shaped like peculiar blue eyes, hands making peculiar gestures, or specific incantations meant to ward off the baleful influence. Imagine living in constant fear of an envious glance, surrounded by peculiar charms to ward off an unseen, peculiar threat. The peculiar role of specific plants and animals in forbidden rites was also crucial. Certain herbs, known for their peculiar hallucinogenic or poisonous properties, were used to induce trance states, create peculiar elixirs, or administer subtle poisons. Animals, particularly those associated with darkness or death like snakes. Owls, or peculiar black cats, were often incorporated into peculiar rituals, their peculiar essences believed to enhance the spell's power. Imagine a sorceress crushing peculiar herbs, mixing them with animal blood under a peculiar moon, whispering incantations to brew a peculiar concoction for dark purposes. Historians still widely debate the precise knowledge of pharmacology and toxicology possessed by ancient magical practitioners, and whether the peculiar effects attributed to their potions were genuinely due to active compounds or psychosomatic responses driven by belief. The peculiar concept of binding spells was a common theme. These spells aimed to inhibit or control someone's actions. Imagine a competitor in a chariot race, seeking to prevent their rival from winning. They might commission a peculiar binding spell, ritualistically burying a scroll with their rival's name and a peculiar incantation designed to bind their limbs, their horses, or their charioteer's skill, causing them to stumble or fail. These were peculiar attempts to manipulate fate and gain an unfair advantage through supernatural means. The peculiar allure of forbidden knowledge was a powerful motivator for practitioners of the dark arts. These were often individuals who felt marginalized by official religious institutions, or who craved power beyond conventional means. They delved into peculiar, ancient texts, seeking peculiar secrets whispered from forgotten deities or long-dead sorcerers. Imagine a scholar, poring over peculiar, crumbling papyri in a hidden chamber, deciphering peculiar symbols and incantations that promised dominion over peculiar spirits, or the ability to foresee the future. This peculiar pursuit of arcane knowledge often came with a heavy personal cost, alienating them from society and potentially exposing them to peculiar spiritual dangers. The peculiar social perception of magic was complex. While protective magic amulets, healing charms might be tolerated or even embraced, aggressive, malevolent magic was almost universally condemned and often punishable by death in many ancient societies. Practitioners of black magic were feared and reviled, accused of peculiar crimes ranging from poisoning to causing epidemics. Imagine the peculiar paradox: people secretly seeking out a sorcerer for a curse, while publicly condemning anyone associated with such peculiar practices. It truly sucked to be an accused sorcerer. In some peculiar instances, the fear of magic even led to ritualistic counter-magic, where communities or individuals would perform peculiar rituals to protect themselves from perceived magical attacks. This might involve creating peculiar protective barriers, burning peculiar herbs to purify a space, or reciting peculiar counterspells. Imagine a peculiar village, consumed by fear of a peculiar curse, performing an elaborate ritual to cleanse their homes and ward off unseen malevolence. The peculiar connection between magic and justice also existed. In ancient Mesopotamia, for instance, If a person was accused of sorcery, they might undergo an ordeal by water, a peculiar form of divine judgment. The accused would be thrown into a sacred river. If they sank, they were guilty. If they floated often due to peculiar physiological reactions or divine intervention, as believed, they were innocent. This peculiar, deadly test illustrates how deeply magic was woven into their understanding of justice and peculiar divine will. In conclusion, the dark arts of magic, curses, and forbidden rites in ancient civilizations reveal a peculiar, unsettling side of human belief and desperation. From the chilling necromancy of Egypt to the pervasive curse tablets of Rome and the peculiar sympathetic magic of Mesopotamia, individuals sought to manipulate unseen forces for deeply personal, often malevolent, ends. These peculiar practices, shrouded in secrecy and imbued with the power of human intention, highlight a profound belief in a world teeming with spirits, demons, and energies that could be bent to one's will. It truly sucked to live in a world where an angry neighbor could theoretically invoke a peculiar curse to ruin your life, where the unseen held such terrifying, peculiar power over the tangible. We've just explored the unsettling world of ancient magic and curses, where lead tablets could bind an enemy's will and necromancers whispered to the dead. If Chapter 8 left you feeling a peculiar shiver about the manipulative side of human belief, tonight we confront perhaps the most chilling and heartbreaking of all ancient rituals. Children of the Corn. Rituals of renewal and fear. You're about to discover how, across diverse ancient civilizations from the Andean mountains to peculiar settlements in the American Southwest, the profound desire for prosperity, fertile lands, or divine appeasement sometimes led to the ultimate, most tragic sacrifice imaginable. The offering of innocent children, making every harvest a peculiar, terrifying bargain with unseen forces. Imagine yourself, now high in the chilling, thin air of the Andean mountains. Perhaps in the Inca Empire, sometime in the late 15th century, the colossal stone cities, like peculiar Machu Picchu, cling to the mountainsides, a testament to an advanced civilization. The sun, Inti, is worshipped as a primary deity, and the land, Pachamama, is seen as a living, breathing entity that provides sustenance. Life here is intimately connected to the peculiar cycles of agriculture and the unpredictable whims of the weather. When the rains fail, when the crops wither, when peculiar volcanic eruptions or devastating earthquakes threaten their existence. The Inca, like many ancient peoples, sought to appease their gods. And sometimes, in their desperation, the most precious offering was chosen children. The Inca practice of capacocha, or child sacrifice, was a profound and peculiar ritual, meticulously planned and executed. It was reserved for moments of extreme crisis, a famine, a plague, a military defeat, or for particularly significant events, such as the peculiar death of an emperor, or the dedication of an important new structure. Imagine a grand procession, not of a military triumph, but of peculiar, solemn devotion. Children, often chosen for their physical perfection and purity, sometimes as young as infants, were selected from various provinces across the vast empire. They were seen as perfect messengers to the gods, untainted and innocent. It truly sucked to be a peculiar, perfect child in the Inca Empire. A common historical truth is that the Inca Empire regularly performed capacocha rituals, involving the sacrifice of children, often by exposure to cold at high altitudes, strangulation, or a blow to the head, to appease deities during times of crisis, dedicate new emperors, or ensure the prosperity of the empire. Numerous well-preserved child mummies have been discovered on Andean peaks, providing chilling evidence of these peculiar practices. These findings offer direct visceral proof of their ultimate devotion. The journey for these chosen children was often long and arduous. Imagine them being led on peculiar pilgrimages, sometimes for hundreds of miles, from their home villages to the sacred mountain peaks, the Apu, which were believed to be homes of the gods. They would be accompanied by priests and their families, often showered with peculiar honors and fine garments. Along the way, ceremonies would be held, and the children would be given peculiar food and drink, sometimes even chicha corn beer, which may have contained sedatives to calm them and prepare them for their peculiar fate. They were not viewed as victims in the modern sense, but as sacred offerings, peculiar conduits to the divine, a fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about the Inca Capacocha is the peculiar physical preparations of the children before sacrifice, including evidence of a special diet and even coca leaf consumption. Analysis of hair samples from child mummies has shown that many were given increasing amounts of rich food, like maize and llama meat, in the months leading up to their sacrifice, indicating a period of ritual feasting. Some also show signs of coca leaf chewing and alcohol consumption from chicha, likely to sedate them or alter their state of consciousness before the peculiar final ritual, making their last moments less terrifying. Imagine a child unknowingly being prepared for death through peculiar feasts and mind-altering substances. Historians still widely debate the precise psychological state of the children during the Capacocha ritual, and whether the peculiar combination of ritual preparation and sedatives rendered them truly unaware or simply dulled their perception of their impending sacrifice. Upon reaching the frigid, desolate mountain peaks, the final peculiar ritual would unfold. The methods of death varied, but all were designed to be swift and relatively painless, reflecting the children's status as cherished offerings. Some were killed by a sharp blow to the head, their skulls often found fractured. Others were strangled or simply left to succumb to the peculiar, extreme cold and lack of oxygen at such high altitudes, falling into an eternal sleep. Their bodies, often meticulously dressed in fine textiles and adorned with peculiar ornaments, were then buried in shallow graves, becoming perfectly preserved ice mummies due to the peculiar freezing conditions. Imagine the tiny, serene faces of these children, preserved for centuries, their peculiar sacrifice frozen in time, a chilling testament to their peculiar destiny. The purpose of these child sacrifices was multifaceted. They were seen as the most powerful form of appeasement to angry gods, capable of averting natural disasters or ensuring a bountiful harvest. They also played a peculiar political role, solidifying the Inca emperor's power by demonstrating his peculiar connection to the divine and his willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice for the empire's well-being. By offering children from different provinces, it also served to integrate newly conquered territories into the peculiar Inca religious system, demanding their participation in the imperial rituals. Moving far from the Andes, imagine yourself in the ancient American Southwest, perhaps among the ancestral Puebloans, formerly known as the Anasazi, who built magnificent cliff dwellings and vast pueblos in places like Mesa Verde or Chaco Canyon. Their lives were intimately tied to the land and the sky, their survival dependent on the peculiar, unpredictable rains that nourished their cornfields in an arid landscape. While not as extensively documented as the Incas, archaeological evidence from certain sites suggests chilling, peculiar instances of ritualized violence, and possibly child sacrifice during times of profound stress. Findings at sites like Pecos Pueblo or even some peculiar rock shelters have revealed skeletal remains of children, sometimes with peculiar signs of dismemberment or other forms of violence, in contexts that suggest non-ordinary burial or peculiar ritualistic acts. While hotly debated among archaeologists, these peculiar discoveries, particularly when coinciding with periods of severe drought or societal upheaval, raise the disturbing possibility that desperation could lead even these peaceful agriculturalists to peculiar, ultimate offerings to ensure the renewal of their crucial crops. It truly sucked to be a child in a time of famine. Historians still widely debate the precise nature and extent of ritualistic violence, including potential child sacrifice among various ancestral Puebloan groups, and whether the peculiar archaeological evidence primarily points to desperate acts of ritual or extreme forms of intergroup conflict. The peculiar concept of fertility and renewal was a driving force behind many ancient rituals involving children. In agricultural societies, the life cycle of crops, planting, growth, harvest, and decay was often mirrored in peculiar human rituals. The sacrifice of an innocent child, a symbol of nascent life and future potential, was believed to invigorate the earth, ensuring the peculiar rebirth of the crops and the continued prosperity of the community. Imagine a peculiar ceremony in a sun-baked field, where the blood of a child is believed to literally fertilize the ground, ensuring the peculiar return of life-giving corn. In some ancient cultures, particularly in the Near East like the Phoenicians and their peculiar colony Carthage, there are controversial historical accounts and archaeological findings that suggest the practice of infant or child sacrifice to deities like Baal-Hamon or Tanit. Imagine peculiar, Tophet burial grounds filled with urns containing the cremated remains of thousands of infants and young children, often accompanied by peculiar stelae dedicated to the gods, found outside ancient cities like Carthage. While the interpretation of these sites is fiercely debated, some argue they were merely peculiar infant cemeteries. The sheer number of remains and the ritualistic context suggest a systematic, disturbing practice driven by peculiar religious fervor or desperate pleas for divine favor. It truly sucked to be a Carthaginian infant. Historians still widely debate whether the Carthaginian Tophets represent true child sacrifice or merely dedicated burial grounds for infants who died of natural causes, and whether the peculiar, often biased accounts from Roman sources have unfairly exaggerated the practice. The peculiar idea of first fruits, or the most precious offering, also played into the rationale for child sacrifice. Just as the first and best of the harvest or herd was offered to the gods, so too was the firstborn child, or the most perfect and unblemished child, sometimes deemed the ultimate offering to secure the most powerful peculiar blessing. This peculiar logic, however horrifying to modern sensibilities, was rooted in a profound belief that the greater the sacrifice, the greater the peculiar divine reward. The psychological impact on the parents and community of such rituals must have been immense. While modern minds recoil at the thought, these ancient peoples lived within a framework where such acts, however agonizing, were sometimes seen as necessary, even pious. Imagine the peculiar paradox: deep love for a child, coupled with a terrifying religious duty that demanded their ultimate sacrifice. The shared trauma, the collective belief in its necessity, would have forged a peculiar, intense bond within the community, reinforcing their peculiar faith in the face of unspeakable grief. The peculiar role of prophecy or divine command also played a part. In some accounts, children were sacrificed because an oracle demanded it, or a priest interpreted a peculiar divine sign as a direct instruction from the gods. Imagine a peculiar, terrifying dream, or a peculiar omen in the sky, interpreted as a divine decree to offer a child, leaving no room for refusal. This shifted the peculiar burden of responsibility from human choice to perceived divine imperative. Even in cultures where human sacrifice became rare or outlawed, the peculiar symbolism of child sacrifice persisted in myth and folklore. Stories of innocent beings offered to mythical beasts, or peculiar deals with malevolent spirits for the safety of a community, echo the ancient memory of such desperate acts. These peculiar narratives served as cautionary tales, or as reminders of a peculiar, darker past. The peculiar archaeological evidence for child sacrifice often involves careful analysis of skeletal remains, context of burial, and peculiar associated artifacts. Forensic techniques can reveal peculiar marks of trauma, age at death, and even diet, painting a grim picture of these ancient peculiar rituals. When a child's bones are found in a peculiar ritualistic context, far from a normal burial, surrounded by peculiar offerings, the chilling conclusion becomes difficult to avoid. In conclusion, the rituals involving the sacrifice of children, from the Incas' ice mummies on Andean peaks to the controversial Carthaginian tophets and unsettling finds in the American Southwest, represent a profoundly disturbing yet peculiar aspect of ancient human belief. Driven by desperate fear of natural disaster, the fervent hope for renewal and fertility, or the peculiar demands of imperial power, These cultures made the ultimate offering of their most innocent members. These peculiar and heartbreaking acts highlight the extreme lengths to which humanity has gone in its peculiar attempts to control an unpredictable world and appease unseen forces. Making the very idea of a bountiful harvest sometimes carry a peculiar, terrifying undercurrent of unimaginable human cost. It truly sucked to live in a world where peculiar gods demanded such a price. We've just confronted the most harrowing of ancient rituals, the sacrifice of children. From the Incas' tragic ice mummies to the chilling finds in the American Southwest. If Chapter 9 left you with a peculiar, heavy heart about the lengths humanity would go to for survival and divine favor, tonight we conclude our unsettling journey by turning our gaze to the modern world, whispers in the modern air, enduring echoes. You're about to discover how the chilling logic and psychological underpinnings of these ancient, disturbing rituals haven't entirely vanished, but have peculiar, often hidden, legacies in contemporary society, revealing that humanity's fascination with ritual, power, and even sacrifice continues to evolve, making the past a strange and unsettling mirror to the present. Imagine yourself, now in your own home, in the early 21st century. Your world is governed by laws, science, and reason. Human sacrifice is universally condemned, a grotesque relic of a bygone era. Yet, if you listen closely, if you look beneath the surface of modern life, you might hear peculiar echoes of those ancient, disturbing practices. Not literal blood offerings, those of course not, but the persistent psychological patterns, the peculiar allure of group identity, the chilling acceptance of necessary sacrifices for a greater good, and the enduring human quest for ultimate power, both over others and over fate itself. It truly sucks to realize how deeply ingrained some of these peculiar human tendencies are. One of the most profound echoes is the allure of belonging and extreme group loyalty, similar to what we saw in ancient cults and warrior societies. Think of modern-day cults or extremist groups. While they might not be literally sacrificing individuals on an altar, their peculiar initiation rites often involve psychological manipulation, isolation, and the demand for absolute devotion, where members are expected to sever ties with their past lives and families. Imagine a peculiar recruitment process, where new members are slowly stripped of their individuality, their critical thinking skills eroded until they are willing to obey any command, even those that lead to self-harm or the harm of others. All for the peculiar truth or purpose of the group. The sense of belonging, the promise of peculiar enlightenment or salvation, can be an overwhelming draw, eerily reminiscent of the psychological bonds forged in ancient mystery cults. A common historical truth is that modern cults and extremist groups often employ psychological manipulation tactics similar to those used by ancient secret societies, including isolation, sleep deprivation, repetitive indoctrination, and the creation of an us versus them mentality to break down individual autonomy and cultivate absolute loyalty to the group and its leader, sometimes leading to acts of collective harm or self-sacrifice. This highlights the enduring power of peculiar group dynamics. The peculiar concept of scapegoating is another ancient echo that persists. Remember the ancient Greeks driving out a pharmakos, a symbolic sacrifice or outcast, to cleanse the city of pollution? Today, while we don't literally stone individuals, societies still exhibit a peculiar tendency to blame a specific group or individual for systemic problems or widespread crises. Imagine a peculiar political campaign where all economic woes are blamed on a specific immigrant group, or all societal ills are attributed to a peculiar, abstract other. This peculiar deflection of responsibility, this psychological need to identify an external cause for internal suffering, can lead to the marginalization, persecution, and even peculiar social sacrifice of vulnerable populations, whose well-being is deemed secondary to the perceived stability or purity of the majority. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about modern echoes of ritual sacrifice is the phenomenon of symbolic defilement and ritualistic cleansing within political discourse or social movements. While no actual blood is shed, peculiar rituals of shaming, public denouncement, or metaphorical purification of a group or ideology can arise. Imagine a peculiar public debate where one side attempts to ritually cleanse a historical narrative by tearing down statues or renaming institutions, believing these acts will purge past sins and somehow restore moral order to the peculiar present. This isn't literal sacrifice, but a peculiar, potent form of symbolic retribution. Historians still widely debate the precise psychological and sociological mechanisms through which symbolic defilement and ritualistic cleansing operate in modern societies, and whether these peculiar behaviors effectively address systemic issues or merely serve as peculiar outlets for collective frustration. The peculiar human desire for control over an unpredictable future continues to manifest in various ways. Albeit less grimly than ancient divination or appeasement rituals, think of the peculiar fascination with horoscopes, fortune-telling apps, or even the peculiar obsessive behaviors of sports fans performing lucky rituals before a big game. These are harmless, often amusing, peculiar echoes of our ancient need to influence fate. More darkly, consider the length some individuals go to for perceived luck or success, sometimes involving peculiar, morally questionable actions or extreme self-denial, believing that peculiar suffering or unique efforts will guarantee a desired outcome, echoing the peculiar logic of offering something precious for a greater reward. The peculiar allure of ultimate performance and public spectacle also carries ancient undertones. Remember the gladiatorial games, where life and death played out for entertainment and ritualistic honor? While we abhor physical violence in most public spectacles, think of extreme sports, reality TV competitions designed to push contestants to their peculiar limits, or even peculiar public shaming rituals on social media. The human fascination with watching individuals undergo intense pressure, facing failure or peculiar humiliation, speaks to a peculiar primal desire for drama, conflict, and the testing of human limits, albeit without the explicit life or death stakes of antiquity. It truly sucks to be a peculiar reality TV star whose life is broadcast for public consumption. The concept of necessary sacrifice for the greater good is a peculiar and enduring echo. Ancient civilizations sacrificed children for bountiful harvests or to avert disaster. In modern contexts, we see this peculiar logic at play in decisions that prioritize collective benefit over individual well-being. Think of peculiar debates around public health mandates during a pandemic, where individual freedoms might be curtailed for the greater good of public safety. Or consider economic policies that lead to widespread peculiar job losses in one sector, deemed a necessary sacrifice for broader economic growth. While not literal human sacrifice, the peculiar utilitarian calculus, the willingness to accept that some individuals must pay the price for the benefit of the many, has a chilling, peculiar resonance with ancient justifications for ritualistic offerings. The peculiar power of symbolism and ritual itself persists in everyday life. From the peculiar rituals of graduation ceremonies, where caps and gowns symbolize transformation, to the peculiar rituals of national anthems and flag-waving, binding a collective identity. We constantly engage in symbolic acts that reinforce belonging, hierarchy, and shared beliefs. While mostly benign, these peculiar rituals demonstrate our inherent human need for structure, meaning, and a sense of shared purpose. Just as ancient rituals structured cosmic understanding and social cohesion, historians still widely debate the degree to which modern secular rituals, like national anthems or graduation ceremonies, truly replicate the psychological and social functions of ancient religious rituals, and whether their peculiar power is consciously understood or simply felt. The peculiar human fascination with death and the macabre also echoes ancient practices. Our peculiar obsession with true crime documentaries, horror movies, or even disaster tourism reflects a primal curiosity about the fragility of life and the darker aspects of human nature. While very different from performing a human sacrifice, this peculiar fascination allows us to vicariously experience the peculiar extremes of life and death from a safe distance, perhaps satisfying a deep-seated, peculiar human curiosity about mortality and suffering that once found expression in ritualized violence. Even the peculiar pursuit of perfection and purity has echoes. Remember the Inca choosing physically perfect children for sacrifice. In modern contexts, this can manifest in peculiar societal pressures for unattainable standards of beauty, intelligence, or success. The peculiar drive to achieve an idealized self, or to project an image of peculiar flawlessness, can lead to peculiar forms of self-sacrifice, extreme diets, overwork, self-denial, or the peculiar ostracization of those who don't fit the mold. All in the peculiar pursuit of an idealized, often impossible, standard of perfection. The peculiar use of blood symbolism still appears, albeit often metaphorically. We speak of blood, sweat, and tears as a necessary sacrifice for achievement, or of blood money acquired through illicit means. While no longer literal, these phrases carry a peculiar, ancient resonance, hinting at the deep-seated cultural memory of blood as the ultimate currency of effort, sacrifice, and peculiar consequence. It reminds us that even our language holds peculiar, hidden histories. In conclusion, as we extinguish the metaphorical torch on our journey through the disturbing rituals of ancient civilizations, it becomes clear that these practices, while shocking to modern sensibilities, were rooted in fundamental human desires and fears: the need for control, the search for meaning, the power of belonging, and the peculiar quest for survival. The explicit human sacrifices, the gruesome embalming techniques, the chilling prophecies, and the hidden cults may belong to the past, but their peculiar echoes continue to whisper in the modern air. From the psychological grip of cults to the scapegoating of the vulnerable, from our peculiar fascination with spectacle to the concept of necessary sacrifices for the greater good, humanity's peculiar nature remains intertwined with the very impulses that drove our ancestors to such peculiar and terrifying lengths. The true legacy of these ancient rituals is not just a historical curiosity, but a peculiar mirror. It reflects our enduring vulnerabilities, our capacity for both profound belief and chilling desperation, and the complex, often unsettling, ways in which we continue to bind ourselves to the peculiar forces we perceive, whether they are gods, ideologies, or simply the abstract concepts of collective good and personal power. So, as you drift off tonight, ponder this peculiar truth: the whispers of the past are never truly silent. They merely change their peculiar tune, reminding us that the human heart, in its peculiar quest for meaning, can still lead us down surprisingly familiar and sometimes unsettling paths.